Chapter 3673. Shui Mingzi and Ao Zhantian were stunned at first, but they soon understood. They looked at each other and greeted Xiao Hua. Su Tingzi and Fairy Jing also hurried over. After the dozens of golden core cultivators greeted them, they also walked over to Chan Yu and Wu Tian and greeted each other again. Don't be anxious, don't be anxious. Xiao Hua smiled again after the situation calmed down. There are still some fellow Taoists who haven't arrived yet, puff puff puff. The mountain river seal trembled again, one after another. Fairy Jing was flabbergasted as more than 30 nascent soul cultivators and dozens of golden core cultivators walked out. It wasn't just Fairy Jing, Chan Yu, and Wu Tian. Even Su Tingzi, Shui Mingzi, Ao Zhantian, and the other nascent soul cultivators who were brought out by Xiao Hua were dumbfounded. After all, they were taken in by Xiao Hua one by one, so they couldn't see anything. Now that they all came out, they could see the results. These were dozens of nascent soul cultivators and hundreds of golden core cultivators. Which country or Taoist cultivator could control so many nascent soul and golden core cultivators? There were dozens of nascent soul cultivators, early, mid, and late nascent soul cultivators, and some of them were familiar with each other. At this moment, those who knew each other greeted each other, and those who didn't know each other introduced themselves. It was a lively scene. Apart from Xiao Hua, who stood at the head of the table, Fairy Jing, Su Tingzi, and the others were also present. Fairy Jing, in particular, was tactful enough to sneak into the group of mid-nascent soul cultivators and exchange greetings with a few of them. After the time it took to eat half a meal, the noise in the hall gradually died down. Xiao Hua looked around and coughed twice, then raised his voice. Fellow Taoists. Although everyone was talking, they were all paying attention to Xiao Hua. When they heard Xiao Hua speak, everyone immediately stopped. Ao Zhantian and the other late nascent soul cultivators stood at the front, while the other cultivators lined up according to their cultivation. They all bowed and said, "Thank you, Taoist Xiao, for saving our lives." As he looked at the nascent soul stage and golden core stage cultivators that filled the place, Xiao Hua's little tail was slightly raised. Right. When Xiao Hua was on the Dawn Rain continent, he had only seen a few nascent soul stage cultivators. Now, these nascent soul stage cultivators that were comparable in number to the Dawn Rain continent had to bow down to him, and even serve him for 1,000 years. How could Xiao Hua not be complacent? However, Xiao Hua's complacency only lasted for a moment. He immediately raised his hand and said with a smile, "Everyone, there's no need to thank me. This is also a coincidence. Moreover, the heavenly Tao didn't want to cut off the descendants of my Tao sect, so it borrowed my hand. If you want to thank someone, you have to thank the Tao sect seniors in the heavens." Hee hee. Ao Zhantian smiled bitterly as he looked at Xiao Hua's harmless smile. He felt extremely bitter in his heart. He had seen Xiao Hua's angry smile before. The soaring dragon shears were even sharper than a sword, hanging above his head. Why didn't the senior from the Taoism appear at that time? Why did he have to swear a blood oath and serve Xiao Hua for 1,000 years to come up with an excuse? Similarly, Xiao Hua didn't care about what others thought and said, "This is also a sign of the prosperity of my Tao sect. You may not know that the Jade Pavilion meeting this time is a trap for Star-Lord Hall to massacre my Tao sect cultivators." At this point, Xiao Hua raised his eyes to look at Fairy Jing. Fairy Jing hid among the nascent soul cultivators and gave Xiao Hua a desperate look. It seemed that she didn't intend to speak. Xiao Hua smiled. He naturally understood what Fairy Jing was thinking. He had obtained the memories of Sun Horse of Star and Tail Fire Tiger. After coming out, he also listened to Zhang Daoran and Master Sun Kong's analysis. Naturally, he knew more than Fairy Jing. It was naturally more appropriate for him to explain than Fairy Jing. Then, Xiao Hua explained the arrangements and plans of the Confucian cultivators on the Jade Mountain, as well as the losses of the Tao sect cultivators. All the cultivators present, whether they were early golden core or late nascent soul cultivators, had a great change in expression. The trace of dissatisfaction and unhappiness in their hearts from being forced to swear allegiance had now completely turned into rejoicing. If they hadn't met Xiaohua, they would have already fallen on the Jade Mountain. Since they could live, why should they care too much? After Xiaohua finished speaking, he looked at the changes in everyone's expressions and said with a smile, "Since the Dao Sect seniors borrowed this Xiao to rescue you, then this Xiao would like to thank the Dao Sect seniors for giving this Xiao an opportunity to work together with everyone to contribute to the Dao Sect of the hidden Immortal continent." At this point, Xiaohua didn't wait for everyone to speak and immediately changed the topic. He scratched his head and said with a smile, "Actually, I won't hide it from everyone. When it comes to contributing to the Dao Sect of the hidden Immortal continent, this Xiao also feels that it's a bit empty. Long before this Xiao came to the Jade Mountain, this Xiao only had one goal, which was to get the Imperial Preceptor's signature and establish my own country. I want to be a comfortable retired emperor and enjoy the happiness of one side. Even when I saw all of you, I only felt a kind of warmth and emotion. To be able to gather so many Taoist cultivators together in the hidden Immortal continent where there are so many Confucian cultivators is really a very happy thing. It's far more interesting than this Xiao hiding in the cave and quietly cultivating. Therefore, I have a wish. Even if we don't contribute to the Taoist sect, even if we don't fight against the Confucian cultivators, even if we drink wine and enjoy the flowers and talk about the sword when we are busy, I want to gather all of you together so that we can enjoy the joy of cultivation." The happiness of cultivation? All the cultivators were dumbfounded. This was the first time they'd heard of the phrase, the joy of cultivation. Perhaps they'd experienced this sort of joy when they just entered the aura refining realm. It was the pleasure of grasping a divine ability for the first time, a comfort that surpassed that of ordinary people. However, as their cultivation grew more difficult and as the years passed, this sort of joy had long since disappeared. Aside from foul winds and bloody rain, there was only infighting and scheming, and even mutual deception. One bottleneck needed to be broken through one after another, one opponent needed to be killed one after another, one conspiracy needed to be cracked one after another. This kind of endless life seemed to have become the main theme of cultivation, making them unable to see any hope. Sometimes many people would ask themselves, why did they cultivate? Was it for the sake of divine ability? Magic power? Lifespan? They had divine ability, they also had magic power, and their lifespan was even more extraordinary. However, when thousands of years of cultivation were dominated by boredom, slaughter, and fear, who would still think about the benefits of lifespan? Where was the happiness? Of course, everyone was different. There were also many ambitious cultivators who found their own position in this long cultivation life and found the so-called happiness of cultivation. Seeing everyone in a daze, Xiaohua faintly smiled and said, "Confucian cultivators often say that there is beauty in books, and there is a house of gold in books. This Xiao doesn't know whether there is beauty in books or not, but this Xiao knows that this is the happiness of Confucian cultivators. Since the cultivation of Confucian cultivators is so happy, why can't the cultivation of Taoism be happy? Of course, this Xiao also doesn't know what this happiness is. I will have to ask everyone to search for it together with this Xiao." Once again, this Xiao thanks everyone. When everyone heard this, they understood that Xiaohua was helping them cover up the awkwardness of being forced to work for them. They were at a loss because they didn't know whether Xiaohua's words were true or false. They didn't know what this happiness of cultivation was. Good. Taoist Zhao's words have broken the sky in the well. This old man's Tao heart has been shaken. This so-called happiness of cultivation, this old man has never thought about it before. After cultivating for thousands of years, this old man should calm down and think about it carefully. Taoist Xiao, this old man wants to go to the Black Wind Mountain Range to study the Tao with Taoist Xiao. I don't know if Taoist Xiao will allow it. Shui Mingzi understood Xiaohua's thoughts. Xiaohua laughed and cupped his hands. Taoist Shui Mingzi can go, how can this Xiao not be happy? We will only study the Tao and discuss the Tao, not fight to the death. We will only see the Tao of heaven and not talk about the difference between Confucian and Taoist. Good. This old man also wants to go. Ao Zhantian hurriedly clapped his hands. Seeing that Xiaohua had given them such a big step and such a great ambition, how could the cultivators who had made the blood oath not know how to take advantage of the situation? In the end, even the cultivators who hadn't sworn blood oaths were overjoyed. It was rare for them to be so enthusiastic about the same thing. Good. Xiaohua waved his hand and a large pile of jade eyes flew out. This is the location of the Black Wind Mountain Range and a message from this Xiao. Take it and go. Fellow Taoists, you are all people with great achievements in cultivation. You are all trustworthy. I look forward to drinking and chatting with you fellow Taoists a year later. This old man will definitely go. I hope Taoist Zhao's immortal wine can satisfy this old man. Ao Zhantian took the jade eyes with a smile. He looked around and said, Taoist Xiao, please open the formation. This old man doesn't have the ability to break Taoist Zhao's formation. Hee, fellow Taoist Ao, please. Xiaohua smiled and opened a corner of the capital heaven star formation. Ao Zhantian didn't stand on ceremony and cupped his hands. This old man will take his leave first. We will meet again at the Black Wind Mountain Range. Please. Xiaohua returned the gesture and sent Ao Zhantian away. Seeing Ao Zhantian leave so easily, Shui Mingzi and the others were relieved. They said their goodbyes and left. Soon, only Fairy Jing, Su Tingzi, and Xiongyi were left in the formation. There were also about 20 golden core cultivators. Su Tingzi didn't say anything. He frowned as if he was thinking about something. Xiongyi also had a puzzled look on his face. He seemed to want to ask Xiaohua something, so he didn't leave. Neither of them had sworn blood oaths to Xiaohua, so Xiaohua couldn't force them. He turned to look at the 20 golden core cultivators. Apart from Chan Yu and Wu Tian, the 20 golden core cultivators all knelt on the ground and kowtowed. Master, this disciple sincerely wants to become your disciple. Please accept us. Hiss. Fairy Jing sucked in a breath of cold air. Su Tingzi's expression changed slightly. As for Xiongyi, his eyes flashed with a hint of fanaticism. Hee, get up! Xiaohua helped the golden core cultivators up and said with a smile, It's not impossible to become my disciple. However, this old man wants to see how your temperaments are. For now, you will all be in name disciples. -13. Chapter 3674. Thank you, Master! All the Jindan stage disciples were wild with joy. After all, they knew better than anyone the difference between being an apprentice and being loyal to a master. Cultivators who had died once could see more clearly than others, and many taboos were nothing more than smoke in their eyes. I don't have the ability to guide you one by one for now. All of you stay with Chan Yu at the side. Once we return to Black Wind Ridge, I'll let all of you know that joining my sect is the best choice you'll ever make in your lives. Oh, it's the best choice besides joining my Tao sect. Yes, disciple understands. Xiaohua's words were somewhat unsteady, but it made many golden core disciples feel warm in their hearts. After agreeing in unison, they stood aside. Xiangyi, Xiaohua asked with a smile. I promise you that I would take you out of the Jade Pavilion gathering. At that time, although you said you wanted to serve me, I knew you were in a dangerous situation and had no choice but to say those words. Now I will give you a chance. You can leave now. Taoist Master Xiao, I want to ask you a question first, then I can decide. Xiongyi said very seriously. Okay. Taoist Master, the joy of cultivation is admiring the flowers and the moon and discussing the Tao. If so, why did Taoist Master come to the Jade Pavilion gathering to snatch the Imperial Preceptor's lot? Xiongyi immediately asked. Let's not talk about cultivation first. Xiaohua smiled faintly and explained. Just talking about happiness, there are many kinds of happiness in the secular world. Drinking wine can make you happy, singing can make you happy, dancing can make you happy, having a lot of friends can make you happy, having power over the world can make you happy, having millions of soldiers can make you happy, and even adjusting your breath in your spare time can make you happy. There is only one kind of happiness, but there are endless ways to be happy. Everyone's happiness may be different. I hope to pursue the happiness of cultivation, but I said before that I don't know what happiness is. That's why I want to discuss the Tao with you all. Some fellow Taoists like alchemy, maybe refining ninth-grade pills can make them happy. Some fellow Taoists like refining tools, maybe refining spiritual treasures can make them happy. Of course, there may also be fellow Taoists who like power, like building a country, like fighting against Confucian cultivators. When the purpose of building a country surpasses the needs of cultivation, this kind of fighting will naturally make fellow Taoists happy. Besides, to experience the joy of cultivation, there's a price. There's no such thing as happiness or pain for no reason in this world. Especially on the hidden immortal continent. If our Taoist cultivators want to be happy, they might have to build on the foundation of the pain of Confucian cultivators. After speaking up to here, Xiaohua let out a long sigh and looked up into the sky. I don't dare to say that I have lofty aspirations, but I also hope that the fellow Taoists I get to know can all find their own happiness. She only smiled and said, I know a little about what you're talking about, but I'm willing to fight with those Confucian cultivators. I feel that it's more interesting than pure cultivation. Xiaohua looks at this cultivator who didn't listen to Taoist Huida's orders at the Jade Pavilion Assembly and nods. Since I've taken the State Master's lot, I'm really going to establish a country. There won't be too few disputes with Confucian cultivators. If fellow Taoist Xiong is willing, I'd like to ask fellow Taoists to lend me a hand. Alright, I'm also someone who died once. Seeing Taoist Xiao being so magnanimous and straightforward, I'm also willing to follow you and see how far our Taoist cultivators can go on the hidden immortal continent. Xiongyi resolutely kneels on the ground and says, Disciple kowtows and salute to Master. Ah? Not to mention Xiaohua himself, even Fairy Jing and the others who were watching from the side also woke up. Why did he want to take Xiongyi as his master? Xiaohua's astonishment disappeared in a flash. With a smile on his face, he said in a low voice, Fellow Taoist Xiong, what do you mean? Isn't it good for you and me to be fellow Taoists? If you work for me, I won't shortchange your cultivation needs. Why do you have to take me as your master? Xiongyi raised his head and said very seriously, Disciple naturally doesn't need to explain the difference between working for me and taking me as your master. If they could be the same, these dozen or so Jinan disciples wouldn't take senior as their master and would choose to work for you instead. Especially disciple, I feel that I've already reached the end of this path of cultivation. I'm already powerless to struggle and unable to find the goal to move forward. Disciple needs a cultivator like senior to guide the way for disciple and illuminate the way forward. Moreover, disciple wants to do, besides cultivate, disciple wants to strengthen our Taoism. No Confucian cultivator can casually bully our Taoism disciples, and the so-called Jade Pavilion meeting can no longer be held. Disciple wants to realize this wish, but without a Taoism expert like senior to protect disciple, disciple can't do it. Moreover, although senior's cultivation is at the upper fourth level, you've already suppressed Taoist Huida, Shui Mingzi, and Ao Zhantian, 3 late nascent soul stage seniors. Stepping into the 5th level is just around the corner. At that time, the number of cultivators who want senior's guidance will be more than the number of carps crossing the river. At that time, senior won't be able to guide them, so disciple might as well become senior's disciple right now and listen to senior's teachings. Can't guide them? A trace of doubt appeared in Xiaohua's heart, but he naturally couldn't ask. Looking at Xiongyi's face, Xiaohua naturally thought of another person. That was Daybreak Continent's Bai Fei. That's right, it was that mercenary Chang Bai sect disciple, Bai Fei. Although this Bai Fei was a Dao sect disciple, during the Sword Dao battle, he used a secret technique to threaten Xiaohua in exchange for the cultivation method he wanted. Moreover, he was quick to react and had an excellent ability to judge the situation. In Xiaohua's opinion, this kind of cultivator was most suitable for cruel cultivation worlds like the Dawn Rain continent, or the hidden immortal continent. Even now, Xiaohua had a feeling that when he left Daybreak Continent, Shi Wuming, Ruo Taohong, and Mo Shan were going to that dangerous place, this Bai Fei would definitely follow them. Xiaohua didn't know whether Shi Wuming and the other two would be able to escape, but Xiaohua was certain that as long as there was a chance, Bai Fei would definitely be able to escape. After nearly 100 years of cultivation, Bai Fei must have reached a considerable height. On the surface, he might not be inferior to Xiaohua himself. Thinking about Bai Fei and then looking at Xiongyi, weren't they both the kind of cultivators who would seize every opportunity to improve their cultivation? Good! Xiaohua pondered for a moment and nodded. Since you have the heart to become my disciple, then I won't disappoint you. I'll accept you as my disciple. Ah? Fairy Jing's small mouth slightly opened. This Xiongyi's way of accepting a master was strange, and Xiaohua's way of accepting a disciple was even more inexplicable. He didn't ask anything, didn't say anything, and just accepted an early nascent soul cultivator as his disciple. Master, please accept this disciple's bow. Xiongyi was overjoyed and respectfully kowtowed. He kowtowed a total of 9 times before getting up. Xiaohua smiled. Xiongyi, you are the first nascent soul disciple this old man has accepted. When this old man has time, I will properly guide your cultivation. I can't let you sully this old man's reputation. Yes, this disciple understands. This disciple will follow master's instructions. Xiongyi very respectfully replied. He didn't feel that Xiaohua was boasting at all. And? Xiaohua nodded. He looked at Chan Yu and the others and said, You all come and greet your senior brother. Chan Yu, Wu Tian, and the other Golden Cord disciples were also dumbfounded. At this moment, they all rushed over to greet this senior brother who was qualified to be their master. However, everyone also heard clearly that the senior brother that Xiaohua spoke of was only senior brother. He didn't say, eldest senior brother. After everyone finished greeting each other, Xiaohua opened his mouth and said, Since you all are this old man's disciples, then you are different from others. You all don't need to return to your respective caves. Go to the Black Wind Ridge first. When you get there, Xiongyi will first assist Li Xiang and the others in the Black Wind Ridge, and establish the Jiang country that this old man promised them. With that, Xiaohua took out a jade eye from his bosom and handed it to Xiongyi. Your identities, as well as the appearance of Li Xiang and the others, are all recorded inside. You all will know when you see it. Yes, this disciple understands. Xiongyi respectfully received it and said, When Master returns to the Black Wind Ridge, this disciple will give Master a complete Jiang country. Master, please be the Imperial Preceptor. TSK. This old man doesn't have the leisure to be the Imperial Preceptor. Xiaohua laughed and said, That's your matter. Go. Seeing that Xiaohua was urging him and didn't give him the Imperial Preceptor's lot, Xiongyi probably already entrusted it to someone else. However, Xiongyi didn't care. After bowing and saluting, he led the 20 or so Golden Cord disciples into the sky. With a wave of his hand, a small flying boat actually landed in front of them. Dozens of people boarded the flying boat, cupped their hands towards Xiaohua again, and flew away quickly. Taoist Xiao. Seeing that there were only 3 people left in the Great Formation, Su Tingzi thought for a moment and said, This one knows that Taoist Xiao has the intention to guide me, but this one, fellow Taoist, are you afraid? Xiaohua asked, hitting the nail on the head. Su Tingzi was stunned and immediately nodded. That's right. If Taoist Xiao didn't save so many nascent soul cultivators and didn't accept so many Golden Cord disciples, as disciples, to be honest, this one really wants to pledge loyalty to Taoist Xiao and cultivate together with Taoist Xiao, just like in the Jade Pavilion Conference. However, Taoist Xiao's movements are really too big. Although Star-Lord Hall's Kong Han Wu might not notice Taoist Xiao right now, he will pay attention to all the Taoist cultivators who came out of the Jade Pavilion Conference. When he sees Taoist Xiao's movements, he will definitely take action. Taoist Xiao, it's not that this one doesn't have confidence in Taoist Xiao, but this one is really clear about the methods of Confucian cultivators. A small Star-Lord Hall, which only controls the Jade Mountain that is several tens of thousands of li wide, was able to kill several hundred nascent soul cultivators and several thousand Golden Core cultivators of my Taoist sect. It can be said that they almost wiped out all the Taoist cultivators of the hidden immortal continent. If they really send out, not to mention immortal soldiers and generals, even if several aristocratic families join forces and send out fierce generals, Taoist Xiao, do you think you can resist them? Hee, fellow Taoist, you're too extreme, Xiaohua said with a smile. I invited these fellow Taoists here just to share the joy of cultivation with them. I didn't say that I wanted to oppose Confucian cultivators. Then what about fellow Taoist Xiongyi? Su Tingzi stared at Xiaohua and asked. -13. Chapter 3675. Establishing a country. Didn't I come to the Jade Pavilion gathering to obtain the imperial teacher's lot? Isn't it just following the requirements of the Confucian cultivators and establishing a country in the name of the imperial teacher? Xiaohua shrugged innocently. Su Tingzi bitterly smiled. Biting words is the specialty of Confucian cultivators. I didn't expect Taoist Xiao to understand this as well. Xiaohua sternly said. Fellow Taoist is correct. I am acting under the rules of Confucian cultivators. I don't have the slightest intention of overstepping my boundaries. The reason I allowed fellow Taoists to stay until now is to give fellow Taoists the leeway to choose. If fellow Taoist doesn't have a choice now, you can return to your cave and think about it. Fellow Taoist helped me with your life, so I will definitely treat fellow Taoists well. Su Tingzi's expression slightly changed when he heard Xiaohua mention this. Killing a Star Monarch of Star Monarch Hall. Xiaohua was extremely daring, and Su Tingzi could be considered to be helping the tyrant. If Star Monarch Hall really pursued this matter, he would be heavily punished. Su Tingzi cupped his hands and bid farewell. This matter. I hope Taoist Xiao can give me some time to think about it. Fellow Taoists, please. Seeing Su Tingzi looking at the formation with some fear, Xiaohua pulled his hand, and the formation was immediately torn apart. Su Tingzi cautiously flew out of the formation and directly flew 300 meters before letting out a sigh of relief. He was the only cultivator who didn't agree to cooperate with Xiaohua. Moreover, he had seen Xiaohua kill Star Monarch Hall's Star Monarch Mu Xian. He was truly afraid that Xiaohua would silence him. After Su Tingzi flew far away, Xiaohua waved his hand and took back the several dozen jade talismans. He then looked at the pensive Fairy Jing and said, Let's go, Fairy Jing. We're going to the single Yang Kingdom. At this moment, Fairy Jing was no longer as calm as before. Her misty eyes flickered with a strange expression as if she was thinking about something or hesitating about something. Hearing Xiaohua's call, she absent-mindedly nodded and followed him into the air. However, it only took a moment for her to come to her senses. She hastily stopped and waited in the air. She directly flew away, leaving Xiaohua extremely far behind her. Fairy, what are you thinking about? Xiaohua chased after her and said with a bitter smile. Why did you leave me behind? It's nothing. Fairy Jing stammered. Wait a moment, fellow Taoist, Speaking of this, Fairy Jing looked apologetic. My mount was originally Yinghua, but it was seriously injured in the Jade Pavilion gathering to save me, so I had to ask you to take a flying boat. Soon after, Fairy Jing took out a small flying boat. After Xiaohua got on, she activated her magic power and flew into the distance. Xiaohua sat cross-legged on the airship and meditated for half a day with his eyes closed. Seeing Fairy Jing's silent appearance, he smiled and said, Fairy Jing, do you have something you want to ask this Xiao? Sigh. Fairy Jing sighs and turns her head. She looks at Xiaohua with her beautiful eyes and says in a low voice, This concubine doesn't want to ask. I just find it strange. Fellow Taoist, you have so many nascent soul cultivators by your side, and any two of them you pick are more powerful than me. Wouldn't they be more suitable to escort you than me? Why did fellow Taoist choose this concubine? Xiaohua smiled and said, It's very simple. It's because you were the first one to notice my serious injuries. Moreover, in order to cover up the news of my injuries, I could only choose you. Fellow Taoist. Fairy Jing slightly shook her head and said in self-mockery, This concubine thinks I can already see through people's hearts. But in front of you, it seems like I'm an idiot. This concubine really doesn't understand what fellow Taoist means. Oh? Hearing this, Xiaohua said in all seriousness. Fairy Jing, although you and I have just met, you were able to save this Xiao. Moreover, in order to cover up my injuries, you walked hand in hand with this Xiao in front of all the cultivators. This Xiao will never forget your actions. Therefore, this Xiao won't hide anything from Fairy Jing. Speaking up to this point, Xiaohua was somewhat tongue-tied. After all, he had already told her that if he hid anything from her, she shouldn't blame him. Seeing Xiaohua's embarrassment, Fairy Jing pursed her lips and smiled, saying, Actually, it's nothing. This concubine already knows that fellow Taoist is using this concubine as a cover to lure others into a trap. This concubine just feels a little uncomfortable. If you had told this concubine earlier, this concubine wouldn't have thought too much about it. Could it be that this concubine would leak it out? Hee, so Fairy Jing already understands. Xiaohua said with a smile. This Xiao still thinks that his actions are flawless. Naturally in the eyes of others, but fellow Taoists didn't hide anything from this concubine. There are many things that even Senior Daoran doesn't know about, so this concubine naturally understands. Fairy Jing said with a smile. Fellow Taoist, there must be nascent soul cultivators lying in ambush inside your nation treasure. After you and I act as bait to lure those cultivators with ill intentions, fellow Taoist will send them out, right? This? Xiaohua scratched his head and said with a bitter smile. I won't hide it from Fairy Jing. This Xiao's mountain river seal can only contain those cultivators. There are no others. Ah? That's impossible. Fairy Jing was a little surprised. She looked around and muttered, There aren't any cultivators following us within a few 100 kilometers. Could it be that this concubine misunderstood fellow Taoist? Xiaohua touched his nose with his hand and thought for a moment, saying, Fairy Jing is right. This Xiao wants to lure people into a trap. Because this person covets this Xiao is very surprised. Because this person has no enmity with this Xiao, and Xiaohua even helped him. However, this Xiao didn't expect that he would want to harm this Xiao. This Xiao wants to know why. In particular, he has seen this Xiao's cultivation and strength. This Xiao really wants to see what his trump card is. Sigh, fellow Taoist is a bit careless. Fairy Jing said worriedly. Fellow Taoist's injuries won't heal for several years. This concubine's strength is limited. Xiaohua smiled and waved his hand. It doesn't matter. This is only a guess of this Xiao's, and it might not be true. Moreover, this Xiao feels that that guy isn't so stupid as to really chase after this Xiao. That's good. Fairy Jing smiled sweetly. Now that fellow Taoist said this concubine's heart is still a bit anxious and on edge. Xiaohua rolled his eyes and said while looking at the sky, This Xiao originally didn't want to say it, but who asked someone to think so much? Hee. Fairy Jing laughed, as if she hadn't relaxed for a long time. The two of them were silent for a moment, and Fairy Jing asked again. This concubine feels that the happiness of cultivation that fellow Taoists talked about to those nascent soul cultivators is very interesting. It seems to have enlightened this concubine, as if this concubine's previous cultivation had deviated. Xiaohua smiled and said, What if this Xiao says that this is nothing but a lie, a drawing of a pie, or a fantasy? Would Fairy Jing be very disappointed? I would. Fairy Jing's face turned bitter. Actually, this concubine also thought about it before. The Confucian cultivators of the hidden immortal continent are really free and unfettered, and the Buddhist sects of the Western Paradise also cultivate Western Paradise. Even the demons of the thousand demon sacred realms should be incomparably free. Why is it that our Tao sects are bullied and controlled like this? Is there no paradise that belongs to our Tao sects? There is. But it's not here, nor is it at this time. Xiaohua nodded with certainty. Oh? Fairy Jing's eyes flashed with surprise. Then fellow Taoist Xiao, tell me, where is it? When is it? There will be such a day. There will also be such a place. Xiaohua made a solemn vow and said, This Xiao will let you see that the cultivators of my Dao sect can freely fly in the sky. My Dao sects will bloom on the earth. My Dao sect seniors will soar into the sky from time to time. There will be a smooth path of cultivation in front of us. Perhaps at that time, this Xiao will talk about the happiness of cultivation with Fairy Jing. Establishing a sect? Fairy Jing's eyes flashed with a trace of a smile. Previously, when I saw fellow Taoist Xiong Yi, and those 20 Jin and disciples call fellow Taoist Xiao Master, this concubine is very fond of you. It feels like a home. Fairy Jing, with your nascent soul middle stage cultivation, you can naturally accept disciples, right? Xiao Hua said with a smile. Fairy Jing wryly smiled and shook her head. This concubine isn't as ambitious as fellow Taoist. I don't dare to attract the attention of Confucian cultivators. At this point, Fairy Jing suddenly thought of something and asked, By the way, fellow Taoist Xiao, when Shui Mingzi and Ao Zhantian were here, why didn't you tell them about the alliance between Zhang Daoran and Master Sun Kong? If you told them, wouldn't they be more confident? It's different. Xiao Hua pondered for a moment and said, These cultivators are fundamentally different from the 200 people that Zhang Daoran and Master Sun Kong brought. Fellow Taoist, please enlighten me. Fairy Jing didn't understand and said with a smile, This concubine is confused. To put it bluntly, these cultivators that I brought were deserters from the Jade Pavilion Conference. Although they experienced bloodshed, they didn't experience life and death. They didn't persevere to the end. It can be said that their nature is cowardly. In the future, when there are few storms, perhaps they will choose to run away again. If this Xiao had told them about my alliance with Zhang Daoran and Master Sun Kong, with their knowledge, they would have immediately understood the size of this force. Perhaps they would have been scared away. Haha, how could that be? Fellow Taoist, you can't bring them out for no reason, right? Fairy Jing looked at Xiao Hua with a smile. Of course. Xiao Hua says with a smile. Everyone has been forced by this Xiao to pledge their loyalty to me for several hundred to 1,000 years. Otherwise, do you think that this Zhao's happy cultivation would be able to move these old ghosts who have cultivated for several thousand years? Hee, that's what I said. Fairy Jing was full of smiles. How could they take the bait so easily? That Su Tingzi, fellow Taoist Xiao, has been earnestly persuading fellow Taoist Xiao for so long, and he's still only considering it. Just as they were talking, a divine sense swept over from afar. This divine sense was very hurried and swept over the flying boat as if it was casual, then swept elsewhere. However, it was only a moment before the divine sense swept back and circled around Xiao Hua for a moment before immediately withdrawing. -13. Chapter 3676. Oh? Who is this? Xiao Hua's face was a bit astonished. He looked at Fairy Jing blankly and asked in astonishment. I'm injured, and my spiritual sense is also somewhat damaged. It's hard to tell who it is. Fairy Jing was startled, but she soon understood. She blinked her eyes and said, This cultivator's cultivation should be at the middle nascent soul stage, but I'm not familiar with his spiritual sense. It's not a fellow Taoist I'm familiar with. It shouldn't be Taoist would either. Oh, Xiao Hua nodded and stood up. He looked into the distance and said with a smile, Is that the fellow Taoist who came to see me off? Perhaps. Fairy Jing didn't dare to stop the flying boat. She continued to fly into the distance, but she was secretly on guard. After all, they had been flying for so long, and they had yet to see any nascent soul cultivators. Perhaps Xiao Hua was right about this sudden appearance. Fairy Jing. A moment later, a voice that Fairy Jing wasn't familiar with came from the distance. Please wait a moment. Fairy Jing slightly tilted her head and thought for a moment. Her expression slightly changed, but soon returned to normal. She said to Xiao Hua, Fellow Taoist Xiao, it's Taoist Yuan Qing. Fairy Jing's eyes flickered with a misty expression. She looked very beautiful. That's right, Xiao Hua said with a smile. Since it's an old friend, let's wait a moment. All right. Fairy Jing looked at Xiaohua's appearance, and could only helplessly nod. She tapped her foot, and the flying boat stopped in midair. After a while, Taoist Yuan Qing flew over. His face was slightly flushed and his forehead was unexpectedly sweating. Taoist Xiao. Taoist Yuan Qing called from afar. Why are you flying in this direction? I thought you were going back to Black Wind Mountain. You flew towards Yu province for a long time. Hee, so it's fellow Taoist Yuan Qing. Xiaohua smiled and cupped his hands. I had some matters to attend to. Liang province, so I didn't directly return to Black Wind Mountain. Hee. Taoist Yuan Qing descended from the sky and glanced at Fairy Jing. I'm afraid you're not really going to Liang province? Are we still going to the seaside? Ha! Xiaohua laughed heartily and waved his hand. You're too kind. This one ran into Fairy Jing at the Jade Pavilion banquet. Moreover, Fairy Jing was slightly injured at that time, so this Xiao conveniently brought her out. After asking, I found out that Fairy Jing was heading in the same direction as this Xiao, so this Xiao abruptly asked Fairy Jing to lead the way. That's all. That's all. Taoist Yuan Qing suddenly understood. He looked at Fairy Jing and said with a smile, Fairy Jing, you're really lucky to meet Taoist Xiao again and again. At this point, how could Fairy Jing not know that Xiaohua was guarding against Taoist Yuan Qing? She also smiled and said, Yes, compared to Jinren Jingting, my luck is not just a little bit better. Sigh. Indeed. At the mention of Taoist Master Jingting, Taoist Master Yuan Qing seemed to have found a topic to talk about. He hurriedly continued and sighed. Apart from the difficulty of cultivation, our Taoist cultivators are also far inferior to Confucian cultivators in terms of luck. Taoist Master Jingting. I'm afraid he's a very extreme example. Although he wanted to serve Taoist Xiao in the end, he still died. At this time, Taoist Master Jingting's nascent soul was naturally already in Xiaohua's mountain river seal. With the mother-child spirit fruit, he should be able to cultivate a scattered nascent soul like Hong Songzi. Although he couldn't compare to Xiaohua and the others, he was still alive after all, which was a lot better than dying. What Xiaohua was currently thinking about was how to use the Immortal slaying platform or the 5 Chi's righteous thunder to refine the 2 nascent souls, and even the 100 or so nascent souls that were about to be repaired. Of course, he wouldn't mention this to Taoist Yuan Qing and the others. Therefore, Xiaohua asked with a smile. That's right, Taoist Yuan Qing chased me all the way here. Is there something you need from this Xiao? Taoist Yuan Qing waved his hand and said, How could there be anything? It's just that this one received a lot of help from Taoists at the Yaobai conference. Moreover, this one already said before entering the Yaobai mountain that this one wanted to ask Taoists for advice on cultivation. Who would have thought that there was no time before the Yaobai conference, and this time, the Yaobai conference was a mess. As soon as this one left the Yaobai mountain, Taoist disappeared. Hastily, Hai Hongzi and I split up to look for Taoist. Oh, later on, Hai Hongzi encountered a lot of calamities in the Yaobai mountain's great formation. In his heart, he regretted not following Taoist. He even wanted to apologize to Taoist. It's fine, Xiaohua said with a smile. It's all in the past. Don't mention it. In the face of benefits and danger, no matter if it's a cultivator or a mortal, they all have a selfish side. This one can't avoid this custom, and there's no harm in imposing it on others. Alas, unfortunately, fellow Taoist Hong Songzi's luck was not good. In the end, he still fell in the Great Formation. Taoist Yuan Qing sighed and said, Fortunately, his nascent soul was protected by the Star Lord Palace's Great Formation. I don't know what kind of opportunity he had. Opportunity? Xiaohua rolled his eyes and asked very strangely. Fellow Taoist Yuan Qing said those fellow Taoists whose bodies were destroyed, their nascent souls weren't destroyed by the Great Formation? Could it be that they had other opportunities? Taoist Yuan Qing smiled bitterly and shook his head. I don't know about this. However, since those nascent souls weren't killed by the Great Formation at that time, they probably wouldn't be killed later on. I only guessed that they might be protected by the Star-Lord Palace. Alas, even if they can protect them, what can they do without their bodies? Xiaohua glanced at Fairy Jing, but her expression didn't change. It seemed that she wasn't looking for Renjing for her nascent soul. Let's not talk about it. Let's not talk about it. Taoist Yuan Qing waved his hand and said, I'll send a messaging talisman to Hai Hongzi. Fairy Jing, let's keep going. I'll take the opportunity to ask you some questions about cultivation. Fairy Jing looked at Xiaohua. Xiaohua smiled and said, Let's listen to fellow Taoist Yuan Qing. If Hai Hongzi doesn't come, we'll take fellow Taoist Yuan Qing to the seaside. Hee, very good, very good. Taoist Yuan Qing sent the messaging talisman and asked Xiaohua to sit down. He also sat down. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly thought of something and said curiously, Oh, Fairy Jing, aren't you injured? How can I trouble you to drive the boat? Why don't you be my spiritual shuttle? Oh, since Taoist Xiao and Taoist Yuan Qing are here, I'll naturally drive the boat. Fairy Jing covered it up casually. Both of you have profound cultivation and are discussing the Tao. I can learn a thing or two from you. And, alright. Taoist Yuan Qing smiled and ignored Fairy Jing. He opened his mouth to ask Xiaohua for advice. Xiaohua didn't stand on ceremony. As long as Taoist Yuan Qing asked a question, he would answer it from the simple to the profound. He didn't hide anything and even drew inferences about other problems. Whether it was the essence of Confucian cultivation or Buddhist scriptures, he could always explain it well. Not only did Taoist Yuan Qing scratch his ears and cheeks, but even Fairy Jing's face blushed as if she couldn't control her joy. For more than 3 days, Xiaohua didn't stop talking. He talked about the essence of cultivation in the middle nascent soul stage. It was like a deluge of heavenly flowers. Occasionally, Fairy Jing would come to realize that Xiaohua wasn't talking to Taoist Yuan Qing at all. He was clearly talking to her. Joy and disappointment appeared in her watery eyes, but she immediately focused and didn't dare to delay. In her 1,000 years of cultivation, she had never been as happy as listening to lectures for 3 days. Taoist Yuan Qing's eyes flashed across the abyss as he pondered. Suddenly, a hint of panic flashed through his eyes. In this panic, there seemed to be reluctance, choice, and hesitation. But soon, Taoist Yuan Qing's eyes became clear again. He stood up with a smile and bowed. Taoist Xiao, this junior really admires Taoist Yuan Qing's cultivation. The teachings I've received in these 3 days are worth 300 years of cultivation. This junior really didn't expect Taoist Yuan Qing to be so well versed in Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. Moreover, you've cleverly combined the teachings of these 3 sections. Although this junior doesn't know what level Taoist Yuan Qing's cultivation has reached, the teachings you've given me in these 3 days have answered all of my questions. This junior is very regretful. If this junior had met senior 100 years earlier, no, 10 years earlier, this junior wouldn't have had such a difficult time. Of course, even so, this junior is confident that I can reach the late nascent soul stage after receiving senior's teachings. This junior must thank Taoist Xiao. Oh? Why are you being so polite? Xiaohua raised his eyebrows and said in astonishment, Fellow Taoist Yuan Qing, please take a seat. This place is still far from where we're going. Let me have a good chat with fellow Taoist Yuan Qing. This junior really wants to ask for some advice from Taoist Xiao. Unfortunately. As Taoist Yuan Qing spoke, his figure turned into a streak of light and immediately fled from the flying boat. His voice, however, remained. Taoist Xiao, your path has come to an end. Oh? Xiaohua didn't find it strange at all. He said regretfully, Fellow Taoist Yuan Qing, you've finally revealed your true face? This Xiao is still looking forward to your repentance. Huh? Taoist Yuan Qing saw that not only was Xiaohua not nervous, he even spoke in such a manner as if he had seen through everything. He couldn't help but turn pale with fright. He hurriedly said, You! How did you know? As he spoke, boom, boom, boom. 3 enormous rumbling sounds rushed out from the clouds of the heavenly moat. Caw! After one of the rumbling sounds, a sharp eagle cry suddenly rang out. A pair of wings that were over 30 meters in size stirred up a strong wind. A tall, red-faced cultivator rushed out from the abyss while standing on Heaven-shaking Tsang. Heaven-shaking Tsang's eyes were like lightning, his eagle claws were like hooks, and his entire body's navy blue feathers were dotted with red spots. Roar! Heaven-shaking Tsang rushed out in front of Xiaohua's head. Another bestial roar that sounded like a great bell came from behind Xiaohua. A short cultivator wearing tight clothes rode a scarlet leopard that was several meters in size out of the fog. Not only was the leopard's entire body scarlet red, even its eyes were abnormally red. Fire lotuses faintly flickered on its 4 hooves as it stepped on the air. -13. Chapter 3677. Looking at Xiaohua's left hand, there was a waterfall hanging upside down in the air. Standing above the waterfall was Hai Hongzi, whom Xiaohua had met before. Heh, sure enough, I've attracted all of you here. Xiaohua sneered. This saves me the trouble of looking elsewhere. Xiaohua. Taoist Yuan Qing was very puzzled. You, how did you know? You, when did you find out? Do you think you're being very secretive? Xiaohua sneered. Don't you think it's too much of a coincidence that you met me? There are thousands of people participating in the Jade Pavilion meeting. How did you meet me all of a sudden? Hearing this, Taoist Yuan Qing sneered. Humph, I was going to welcome Hong Songzi at that time, but I didn't expect you to be there. Didn't I take advantage of the situation? Isn't what you're saying a bit too far-fetched? Then, in the first formation, you clearly knew that Taoist Xiangtian was related to Fairy Xiangfeng, so why did you let your two-headed snake fight with Taoist Xiangtian? You were so anxious to provoke a fight, didn't you want me to meet Taoist Xiangtian face to face? Do you think I'm an idiot? Xiaohua laughed. Taoist Yuan Qing nodded. You're right, this was my mistake. I was a bit impatient, but you can rest assured that Taoist Xiangtian's death. I've already found someone to tell Fairy Xiangfeng about it. I'll take your head to Fairy Xiangfeng. You're really a troublemaker. Xiaohua sighed. Before the Jade Pavilion meeting, I was still worried about Fairy Xiangfeng's revenge, but now I don't care. Do you think you can escape from the 4 of us? Hai Hongzi sneered. Unfortunately, Xiaohua ignored Hai Hongzi and said to Taoist Yuan Qing. Also, when you snatched the jade box in the formation, you didn't snatch it yourself, but called my name and asked me to do it. Isn't this the trick that Fairy Jing used to call Taoist Jingding's name? I've done this kind of thing before, how could I not know? It was at that time that I became suspicious of you. Taoist Yuan Qing's face darkened. Actually, now that I think about it, you pulled me, Hong Songzi, and Hai Hongzi to participate in the Yaotai gathering together before the Yaotai gathering. At that time, Hai Hongzi had already said that he and you had already practiced the joint attack of the 3 of you, so there was no need to pull me along. This itself was also a flaw. I don't think Hai Hongzi knew about your plan at that time, right? Also, I beat you at your own game twice. One time, I killed Jingmubai, and the other time, I killed Soaring Heaven. You didn't help me even once, right? You said that you wanted to join hands with me, but you didn't even try to help me. You even let Reverend Xiangtian stab me in the heart with a flying sword in front of you. This really makes me feel disappointed. Killed Jingmubao? Hai Hongzi was shocked. The other 2 cultivators also had strange expressions on their faces. Haha, Xiaohua, what's the use of saying this now? Immortal Yuan Qing could not allow Xiaohua to continue speaking. He laughed out loud and said, Even if you have the ability to kill a Star Lord, you were seriously injured at the Yaotai banquet. Lying in the red clouds, you did not even have the slightest feeling. How could you possibly be a match for us now? Don't tell me that it wasn't Fairy Jing who brought you out of the Yaotai gathering. Don't tell me that it was Fairy Jing who used her magic power all the way, and you didn't use any magic power at all. Don't tell me that your cultivation was destroyed. Don't tell me that you didn't go back to the Black Cloud Ridge and went somewhere else. Don't tell me that you were afraid that others would kill you on the way. As he spoke, he looked at Fairy Jing's expression and smiled. Fairy Jing, this old man doesn't know how you were bewitched. When you saw the dying Xiaohua, you didn't even care about your own life to save him. If you didn't make that choice back then, you wouldn't have died today. Ah? Fairy Jing raised her eyebrows and said in surprise, What? You were there that day? Yes, he was half a step earlier than you, Xiaohua said with a smile. Unfortunately, he was frightened by my plan to beat you at your own game. He thought it was my plan this time, so he didn't dare to make a move. When he wanted to make a move, you came. But when he wanted to make a move on you, the formation was broken. So he had no choice but to endure until now. How do you know everything? Taoist Yuanqing looked as if he had seen a ghost, his face pale. Xiaohua shook his head slightly. There are still many things I don't know. I don't know why you want to kill me. I also don't know why I've told you so much in these 3 days. You clearly know that my cultivation is far above yours, but you still want to kill me. Fellow Taoists. Taoist Yuanqing didn't answer Xiaohua. Instead, he turned to Hai Hongzi and the other two and said, Now that things have come to this, there's no need to retreat. Xiaohua killed Star Monarch Jing Mushuan of Star Monarch Palace. He won't let this news leak out. Regardless of whether he still has magic power or not, he won't let us live. Moreover, fellow Taoists, don't worry. I did see Xiaohua faint earlier. He was brought out of Jade Mountain by Li Jing. He doesn't have the magic power to fly. Moreover, in these 3 days I didn't see him use any true essence. His nascent soul is long gone. When Hai Hongzi and the others heard this, their expressions became calm. At this time, Taoist Yuanqing said to Xiaohua, Xiaohua, as for why I want to kill you, you can rest assured. I'm not an idiot. I definitely won't tell you. However, I can tell you that even if you preach in front of this old man for 3 days, this old man will still kill you. Because as long as we kill you, the 4 of us will no longer be restricted by Confucian cultivators. We can live freely in hidden immortal continent. Arrogant people like you don't know how powerful the Confucian cultivators on hidden immortal continent are. Only death awaits you if you go against them. Enlistment. Enlistment by Confucian cultivators? Xiaohua said coldly. Henceforth, you'll become a lackey of Confucian cultivators. They don't need to care about you and let you live or die. But do you really have your own freedom? Whether I have freedom or not, this old man doesn't know now. This old man only knows that your head is the proof of our allegiance. Taoist Yuanqing's face was somewhat ferocious. In fact, long before this old man stepped on the flying boat, this old man had some plans to persuade you to join the Confucian cultivators. But after listening to your speech, this old man immediately gave up this idea. With you in front, this proof of our allegiance, isn't it more important than others? Moreover, this old man also understood why those Confucian cultivators wanted to kill you. You're the second grandest ancestor. Who are those Confucian cultivators? Xiaohua asked. Ha. Taoist Yuanqing laughed loudly and pointed his hand. Taoist Xiao, do you think I'm a 3-year-old child? Taoist Yuanqing, don't take out this kind of inferior trick and make a fool of yourself. Taoist Yuanqing, you're still thinking about how to get out of trouble and how to escape from our attacks, right? Alas! Xiaohua sighed and glanced at the rather nervous Fairy Jing. He shook his head and said, Our Tao sect's disciples were originally weak in the hidden immortal continent. The Jade Pavilion gathering even drew out the greedy Tao sect's disciples from their seclusion. 60% of them were killed in Star-Lord Hall's net. Well, it could be said that less than 70% of them survived. This old man felt very pained and felt that he had the heart, but was powerless. But look at you guys, for the sake of enlistment by Confucian cultivators, you actually abandoned your own principles and offered your savior to them as proof of your allegiance. With your actions, even if you can enter the Taoist path, so what? Even if you listen to this old man's lecture for 100 days, so what? After saying this, Xiaohua narrowed his eyes and looked at Zhang Jintian, whose wings covered the sky. His expression was rather desolate. In order to kill this old man, you really put in a lot of effort. Is this Zhang Jintian specifically going to deal with this old man's spirit-seeking mouse? Where's your two-headed monster, Si Hong? Are you afraid to take it out? Afraid that my spirit-seeking mouse will dig out its heart? Xiao Hua then looked at the scarlet rainbow leopard and sneered. And this beast, presumably it's going to deal with Fairy Jing's demonic beast, Inghua, right? And you four beasts, if you think you can bully Fairy Jing, then you can deal with this old man, who lost all his Taoist techniques because he saved Taoist disciples on Jade Mountain, right? It's useless to say more. The tall cultivator standing on top of Tseng Jintian said coldly. This old man doesn't know who you are, nor what you did in the past. This old man only knows that with your head, this old man will be able to properly cultivate. I won't be afraid of being remembered or hunted down by Confucian cultivators. Since you call yourself a senior, and have such a broad heart, why don't you give your head to this old man? How about helping this old man? If you want to take Taoist Master Zhao's life, you'll have to step over my corpse first. Fairy Jing sneered and waved her sleeve. GG. Several sounds that were unwilling to be left out flew out from her sleeve. The demonic beast, Inghua, swayed its big ears and a bewitching light flew out from its eyes. Eh? Xiao Hua was slightly taken aback because Inghua seemed to be in good spirits and didn't seem to have any serious injuries. It was far from what Fairy Jing had said earlier. Xiao Hua looked at Fairy Jing with some doubt. At this moment, Fairy Jing had already walked in front of Xiao Hua and blocked him with her figure that couldn't be considered weak. Hee hee. Sure enough, you two are in love! Taoist Master Xiao, you have such good luck with women! Another cultivator standing on a rainbow leopard opened his mouth and laughed loudly. His eyes flashed with a dirty look. Participating in the Jade Pavilion gathering and being able to obtain the heart of a nascent soul female cultivator is more precious than any treasure. But rest assured, Taoist Master Xiao, your luck with women, this old man will enjoy it for you in the future. Xiao Hua didn't pay attention to that cultivator's gaze. He looked at Taoist Master Yuan Qing and nodded. For this ambush, you've really put in a lot of effort. Not only did you find Tseng Jintian, who naturally restrains seeking spirit mice, you even found a demonic beast that Inghua is afraid of. AI, to be honest, to be able to arrange all this in such a short time, you're definitely a genius. Killing you is truly a pity. -13. Chapter 3678. Taoist Master Yuan Qing wasn't moved by Xiaohua's words and coldly said, This old man didn't arrange it, it's just that your luck is too bad, and it's also because Confucian cultivators are too powerful. No matter what you say now, it's useless. This old man has already observed that no cultivators have passed through the surrounding 50 kilometers in the past 3 days. Don't even think that a cultivator will come and save you. Haha, that's the biggest joke in the world. This is the first time I've heard someone say that my luck is bad. Xiao Hua laughed heartily as he looked at Fairy Jing's rabbit-like demon beast. Although it looked very fierce, it actually cowered under the gemstone-red gaze of the rainbow leopard expert in the distance, and its body trembled from time to time. Thus he said to Fairy Jing, who was standing in front of him, Fairy Jing, put away your bewilderment. We don't need it to deal with these beasts. No! Fairy Jing refused without hesitation and patted her qianquan bag. It was the jade pendant that Xiao Hua had seen before. As soon as the jade pendant rushed out of the space, it immediately emitted a tenacious brilliance that protected Fairy Jing and Xiao Hua. Fairy Jing then opened her mouth and spat out a magic treasure that looked like a shell. The shell emitted a tricolored brilliance and slowly expanded. A fierce, desolate, and even fishy aura emanated from the shell. Fairy Jing's face was cautious, as if she really didn't care about her own life. There was a rare stern look in her eyes that was like smoke and ripples. Many thanks, Fairy Jing! Xiao Hua sighed and whispered behind her. It's good that Fairy Jing is so considerate. As for taking action, that's my business. After saying that, an auspicious cloud appeared under Xiao Hua's feet and carried him into the sky. Xiao Hua waved his hand, and Little Silver flew out of the space. Sure enough, as soon as Little Silver, who had always been obedient, flew out, sky-shaking heavens raised its head and screamed. Its wings flapped as if it wanted to rush over. Little Silver shrunk its neck and immediately flew into Xiaohua's hand. It hid its small mouse face behind Xiaohua's thumb, revealing only half of its mouse eyes. Who knew if it was really afraid or just faking it? Xiaohua completely ignored Little Silver's show-off. With a flick of his middle finger, he motioned for Little Silver to fly towards the rainbow leopard. He then waved his other hand, and a black shadow mixed with golden light flew out of his hand. It was none other than the divine power centipede which had appeared on a demon cloud. Ah! Taoist Yuan Qing was a little stupefied. He indeed didn't expect Xiaohua to have two demon beasts. But when he saw the divine power centipede, he sneered and waved his hand. Fellow Taoists, success or failure. As long as we kill him, his demon beasts and the treasures in his Qianquan bag from the jades in his Qianquan bags. This old man doesn't want these things, this old man only wants Xiaohua's head. Kill! Since Taoist Yuan Qing had given the order, Hai Hongzi and the other two didn't waste time. They each rode their demon beasts, and urged their magic power to attack Xiaohua and Fairy Jing from all sides. He he! Xiaohua sneered. Chirp chirp! When the divine power centipede heard this, it immediately unleashed its might. With a hiss, strange runes surged around its body. Then, with a burst of demon qi, it grew to several feet long and pounced at sky-shaking heaven's abdomen. Little Silver, who had been flying slowly in the air, suddenly sped up. There was even a rumbling sound in the air, but it was only for a moment before a silver curve, almost invisible to the naked eye, pounced at the rainbow leopard's back. Roar! Sky-shaking heavens roared. Roar! The rainbow leopard also roared. The two demon beasts jumped up together and took the initiative to fly out from under the two nascent soul cultivators. Their eyes flashed with a flirtatious light. They were clearly very excited and cared a lot about their opponents. Woo-woo! While the demonic beasts were fighting, Taoist Master Yuan Qing's halberd let out a wave-like cry. Hai Hongzi's magic weapon that was like a waterfall let out a mighty roar that was even more powerful than Fairy Jing's shell magic weapon. The two nascent soul cultivators activated their divine thoughts, and the transcendence energy around their bodies transformed into two huge hands, grabbing towards Xiaohua. Ha! Xiaohua laughed, and shook his head slightly. If I kill you all, it'll really be bullying you. It'll be an unfair victory. As he spoke, sword qi flashed around Xiaohua's body. Thousands of sword lights suddenly burst out from Xiaohua's body. Then, Xiaohua opened his mouth and 4 flying swords of different colors rushed out. The thousands of sword lights surged with sword qi and turned into 4 giant swords that flew towards the 4 cultivators. The sword qi was imposing, the sword light was cold, and an austere aura sealed off the entire area. You're a Confucian cultivator? Taoist Yuan Qing was shocked, and his face turned ashen. After all, the position of Xiaohua's sword was enough to block one of Ming Hao's halberd's attacks. Without Fairy Jing's help, Xiaohua would still be undefeated in a 1 versus 4 battle. Xiaohua sneered. You think I'm all talk and no action? After listening to me for 3 days, I'm afraid that you're only thinking about how to kill me, right? I'm impossible. You're proficient in Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. Taoist Yuan Qing didn't dare to believe it. At this moment, 4 loud sounds rang out as the flying swords struck Ming Hao's halberd. Ming Hao's halberd, which hadn't been damaged even during the Jade Pavilion conference, was instantly pushed back several meters by Xiaohua's flying swords. A deep crack appeared on it, and it looked like it was about to break. With Ming Hao's halberd in such a state, Hai Hongzi's magic weapon was even worse. With a loud bang, the sword light was split in half, and Hai Hongzi's figure flew back several meters, his face dark red. The other 2 cultivators were even more miserable. Not only were their nascent soul's hands shattered, but their left and right arms were also shattered by the sword light. Their faces flashed with astonishment, as if they had never seen such tyrannical sword qi before. Let's go! Taoist Yuan Qing was indeed an ambitious and ruthless person. Seeing that Xiaohua was unstoppable, he immediately made a decision. We don't need to tangle with him. As long as we pass the news of him attacking Star-Lord Palace's Star-Lord well to Mount Yaotai, Senior Kong Hanwu will naturally personally take his dog head. Aoo. At this moment, the arrogant rainbow leopard let out a miserable roar, leaving behind its last sound in this world. Then, its body fell from the sky. That cute little silver swung its body and carefully used its little paws to wash its face in the air. It was unknown whether it was because of mysophobia or because it was shy. Hiss! The thin and small cultivator sucked in a breath of cold air. He didn't know that he was even more shocked that his arm was injured by Xiaohua, but before he could urge his body to fly back, Jie! An extremely heavy hissing sound came from afar. The demonic cloud in the sky suddenly flourished, and then a bloody light suddenly appeared. The sky's shaking heavens was actually split in half from head to toe by a black light. Taoist Yuan Qing was scared silly. He had really calculated for a long time and thought of many possibilities, but he still neglected to consider that Xiaohua actually had the cultivation of a Confucian cultivator. Even if his dantian was shattered and his nascent soul was destroyed, he still couldn't be Xiaohua's opponent. This so-called demonic beast divine power centipede was even more unexpected, and he didn't even consider it. After all, it was already good for a Taoist cultivator to have a demonic beast as a companion. How could they raise a second demonic beast? Go, go, go! This was Taoist Yuan Qing's only thought at this time. Trembling with fear, he didn't dare to stay any longer. Unfortunately, this simple thought couldn't be realized now. Just when the four nascent soul cultivators wanted to urge their magic power to escape, they suddenly felt an incomparably powerful force confining them. Oh, it couldn't be said to be confinement, because there wasn't the slightest bit of magic power fluctuation. It was a kind of pure power. Taoist Yuan Qing turned pale with fright. He hurriedly rubbed his hands, and several rays of light suddenly appeared in the void. The light around Taoist Yuan Qing violently trembled, and cracks that could be seen with the naked eye appeared in midair. The hand of a nascent soul? When Hai Hongzi saw this, a familiar feeling spontaneously arose, and he couldn't help but involuntarily cry out, "You, how can your divine sense, how can it be so strong?" Another nascent soul cultivator was so scared that he trembled slightly, and said in a low voice, Are you a nascent soul cultivator? Go to hell!" Xiaohua didn't answer, and indifferently opened his mouth, like a god in the sky. The actions of these four people were no different from bandits. What was special was that they had superhuman divine abilities. If they were left in the world, they would only be able to kill more Taoist cultivators. Following Xiaohua's words, the four divine senses were like hammers, rushing down, and a rumbling sound rang out in the air. "See! Falling stone array!" Fairy Jing had already put away her magic treasure, and when she heard the familiar whistling sound, she couldn't help but think of the huge falling stone that made her tremble with fear. Facing this divine sense hammer that was comparable to falling stars, the four nascent soul cultivators' faces were ashen. They finally understood why Xiaohua wasn't afraid of them. With such a strong divine sense, even if he didn't have a dantian, then, so what? Fight! Taoist Yuan Qing let out a heart-wrenching roar, and just as he opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood essence, a withered green wooden vine flew out. Boom! Light flashed around Taoist Yuan Qing's body, and the strong impact instantly tore his body into pieces. A 6-foot-long nascent soul flashed inside his body, and its figure slightly drifted, as if it was about to teleport. Unfortunately, when Xiaohua stretched out his hand, the space around the nascent soul was like iron, and the nascent soul couldn't disappear after squeezing for a moment. Xiaohua waved his hand, and the nascent soul immediately fell into his hand. Xiaohua didn't hesitate to stretch out his left index finger, and a faint crystal thread entered the space between the nascent soul's eyebrows. After a moment, several dark green lights flashed between Xiaohua's eyebrows, and strands of ghost-like light once again fell between the nascent soul's eyebrows. After that, there was nothing after that. Facing a cultivator like Xiaohua who was able to kill a cultivator of the upper 5th level of essence energy, How could 3 nascent soul cultivators of the middle 4th level of essence energy be his opponent? The bodies of the 3 cultivators were shattered by the divine sense hammer, and after Xiaohua searched their souls, the 3 nascent souls were stored in the mountain river seal. In the future, even if they came out, they could only wear the Taoist robes of the green-robed Xiaohua. A painstakingly planned ambush was only a wedding dress for someone else. -13. Chapter 3679. Seeing Xiaohua deal with 4 cultivators who were more powerful than her so easily, Fairy Jing had an indescribable feeling in her heart. It was as if she had been cheated, but also as if she was relaxed. She even felt that it was only natural. As for Xiaohua's method of dealing with the 4 nascent soul cultivators, Fairy Jing didn't think much of it. She knew that if she and Xiaohua had fallen into their hands, it would have been even worse. However, she was still a little curious. She didn't understand why he had to keep the 4 nascent soul cultivators alive. Of course, she wouldn't ask too much. She landed on the flying boat with a smile in her eyes. "Fellow Taoist Xiao, do you still need me to steer the boat for you?" "Hee, of course not." Xiaohua laughed and waved his hand, and the Pegasus pulled the flying carriage out. Fairy Jing's eyes lit up at the sight of such an arrogant Pegasus, and she smiled. "Fellow Taoist Xiao is indeed very resourceful. This kind of light feather unicorn is very rare in the world." "Oh? This is called a light feather unicorn?" Xiaohua raised his eyebrows. "I thought it was a Pegasus. Although Pegasuses also have light feathers, they don't have a horn." Fairy Jing landed on the flying carriage with a smile. "Moreover, Pegasuses are most particular about the purity of their bloodline. The Immortal Palace would never let their Pegasuses." At this point, Fairy Jing stopped talking. She looked at the light feather heavenly horse with some envy and said, "Actually, it's this kind of demonic beast with an impure bloodline that has the potential to develop. It can have unexpected abilities." Xiaohua also landed on the flying carriage. He patted the Pegasus with his hand and put little silver on its back. He put away the divine power centipede and said, "I didn't expect Fairy Jing to know so much about demon beasts." Fairy Jing pursed her lips and smiled. "Didn't I tell you before? I established my country by the sea, and there are often demons of the 1,000 demons sacred realm, who come to trade. It would be strange if I didn't know about this." "That's right." Hearing this, Xiaohua seemed to have thought of something. He extended his hand and said, "Fairy Jing, if possible, please give your magic treasure to me. I'll find some time to refine it for you. If it has the power of a spirit treasure, consider it my apology for deceiving you." When Fairy Jing heard this, her face turned red, and her eyes flickered. She bit her lips and said in a low voice, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, I appreciate your kindness. It's just that my magic treasure is different from others. I can only refine it myself, and no one else can help me." "Oh? There's such a strange thing?" Xiaohua was stunned and wanted to ask more, but seeing Fairy Jing's awkward expression, he knew that her magic treasure was a bit strange, so he didn't ask any more questions. He scratched his head and said, "This is troublesome. This Xiao has to do something to feel at ease." Fairy Jing pursed her lips and said, "If fellow Taoist Xiao has the heart, just like what you said a few days ago, explaining cultivation to me again, I would be very grateful." "Good," Xiaohua said with a smile. "This Xiao likes this kind of business that only talks and doesn't make a loss. Fairy Jing, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. This Xiao can help you resolve them." Fairy Jing was stunned by this question. She opened her mouth, but didn't know what to say. After all, what Xiaohua said in 3 days was enough for her to comprehend for many years. Even someone as strong as Taoist Yuanqing praised that 3 days was equivalent to 300 years of bitter cultivation. Although this was a bit exaggerated, it also showed that what Xiaohua said was indeed profound. Fairy Jing had already heard a lot. If she couldn't comprehend it herself, what was the point of asking more? "All right," Xiaohua blinked and said, "Then let's chat casually." There's no need to worry about any cultivation method. Actually, fellow Taoist Xiao. Seeing that Xiaohua didn't pursue the matter, Fairy Jing's eyes flashed with a strange light. She said, I have a little secret that I don't want others to know. It doesn't matter. Xiaohua waved his hand. It's nothing. Every cultivator has their own privacy. I won't let you know about my privacy. My privacy is also nothing. Fairy Jing thought for a moment and asked in a low voice. I wonder what fellow Taoist thinks about the monsters of the Thousand Monsters Sacred Realm? Monsters? Xiaohua was stunned. He thought for a moment and smiled. Monsters are monsters and humans are humans. Monsters don't seem to be lower than humans and humans aren't nobler than monsters. That's all. That's right. Fellow Taoist is right. Fairy Jing bit her pale lips and nodded. It's something that can't be compared. Why force yourself to compare? That day, I saw you make a deal with Ingpa of the Thousand Monsters Sacred Realm. Although other people have something to ask of monsters, there was disdain on their faces when they made the deal. On the other hand, fellow Taoist Zhao's smile was so sincere that I rarely saw it. So, I really feel that, in the eyes of fellow Taoists, monsters and humans are equal. Fairy Jing, you're making me embarrassed. Xiaohua scratched his head. But we both have our own needs. I've never thought of such a high level. Speaking of this, Xiaohua blinked. He seemed to have thought of something and a strange light appeared in his eyes. Sure enough, Fairy Jing blushed and said shyly, Fellow Taoist Xiao must have already guessed that my bloodline isn't pure. I have monster blood flowing in my veins. Is that so? Xiaohua smiled. What's so strange about that? Do you think I'm a Confucian Taoist? Hee. Seeing that Xiaohua acted as if he hadn't heard her, Fairy Jing relaxed and said, That heart shell is a magic treasure that I was born with. The secrets inside can only be discovered by me. Others can help me, that's good. Xiaohua nodded. If possible, could you let me take a closer look at that heart shell? When Fairy Jing heard this, a trace of shyness appeared on her face. Seeing this, Xiaohua hurriedly waved his hand. Forget it. Just pretend I didn't say anything. Fellow Taoist Xiao, please wait a moment. Seeing Xiaohua waving his hand, Fairy Jing was a bit worried. She hurriedly opened her mouth, and a three-colored brilliance rushed out from her mouth. The fist-sized heart shell flew out and landed on Fairy Jing's hand. Fairy Jing handed the heart shell to Xiaohua without hesitation and lowered her head. Fellow Taoist Xiao, please take a look. Looking at how Fairy Jing's ears were burning and how she didn't dare to look him in the eye, how could Xiaohua not know that he was being rude? However, although he did not take the heart shell, he still looked at it carefully. He saw that this heart shell was like a real shell, with lines engraved on it. Between the lines, there were extremely small runes buried within. The runes were a little strange, but Xiaohua found them familiar. Weren't they the runes on the bones of the two demonic beasts from before? However, Xiaohua's gaze was fixed on the three-colored light of the heart shell, as he was familiar with these three colors. Taoist magic treasures and spells were mostly bright, and three-colored lights were not uncommon. However, the three colors of Fairy Jing's heart shell were different from the other three colors. They were bright and lively, just like a person's eyes. These three colors were very similar to the seven-colored conch's brilliance Xiaohua obtained in the Sui He seabed formation. Moreover, Xiaohua saw that these three colors were three of the seven colors of the conch, and they were very similar to the size of the light. Thump thump. Just as Xiaohua was concentrating on examining the heart shell suddenly trembled like a human's ear. Xiaohua's eyelashes also moved along with the trembling. He no longer dared to look closely and hurriedly withdrew his gaze. He smiled and said, Fairy, this heart shell is really beautiful. And Fairy Jing responded in a low voice and quickly withdrew her hand. The heart shell strangely disappeared, and even Xiaohua didn't see how she put it away. After a while, Fairy Jing's expression returned to normal, and she said in a low voice, Didn't fellow Taoist Xiao ask me? how to use the Renjing from Yaotai Mountain. Actually, I want to use it on this heart shell. Oh, I understand. Xiaohua rolled his eyes and asked, Then, is it true that the older it is, the more useful it is for Fairy Jing? Of course. Fairy Jing answered without hesitation. Ah! Fairy Jing immediately cried out in alarm because Xiaohua waved his hand and a dazzling golden Renjing immediately appeared in front of her eyes. Xiaohua said very calmly, I have occasionally obtained Renjing in the past, but I didn't know what it was, so I kept it. Only today at the Jade Pavilion gathering did I know the origin of this item. I'm afraid I won't be able to use it. How about exchanging it for Fairy Jing's Renjing? Okay. Fairy Jing smiled like a flower, and didn't act polite with Xiaohua. She took Xiaohua's Renjing and gave her Renjing to Xiaohua, which was not only pitifully small, but also had a very different luster. She then said, Many thanks, fellow Taoist. If I succeed in my cultivation in the future, it will be fellow Taoist's credit. Your own cultivation has nothing to do with me. Xiaohua waved his hand and said with a smile, By the way, if fellow Taoist needs my help, feel free to tell me. My cultivation isn't high, but I have some disciples under me, and some of them can travel in the Thousand Demons' sacred realm. Fairy Jing returned the favor and asked. Xiaohua muttered to himself, and with a wave of his hand, he took out a jade eye and placed it on his forehead. After a moment he handed it to Fairy Jing and said, I don't know if Fairy Jing has seen this before, or if you know what it is. Fairy Jing took the jade eye and looked at it. A look of disbelief appeared in her eyes, but after a moment she murmured, That's not possible. That's not possible. Xiaohua's heart moved, and he stared at Fairy Jing, waiting for her reply. Unexpectedly, Fairy Jing raised her head and said, This thing. I haven't seen or heard of it before. However, I'll help fellow Taoists look for it. If I have any news, I'll send a message to Senior Taoist and ask Senior Taoist to pass it on to fellow Taoist. Okay. Xiaohua said with a smile. I'll have to trouble Fairy Jing. However, if Fairy Jing has any news, it's better to directly send it to me. There's no need to let Shang Taoist know. -13. Chapter 3680. Haha! When Fairy Jing heard this, she didn't say anything. She hesitated for a moment before asking in a low voice. Fellow Taoist Xiao I have a secret. I want to ask. I don't know if I should say it. If it were anyone else, Xiaohua would definitely reply. Since you don't know if you should say it, then don't say it. But when he saw Fairy Jing's slightly red face, Xiaohua seemed to think of something and faintly smiled. Fairy, if you have something to say, then say it. I'll tell you everything I know. Fellow Taoist Xiao. Fairy Jing bit her lips and looked outside the flying carriage. Her voice was lower than a mosquito's. I wonder which fellow Taoist has the fortune to be your dual cultivation partner? This? Xiaohua wasn't surprised. He was just hesitating on how to explain it to Fairy Jing. After thinking for a moment, he faintly looked at the clouds below the flying carriage and sorrowfully said, I'll tell Fairy a story. Then, Xiaohua slightly concealed the matter between him and Shui. Shui's feelings were so deep that even Fairy Jing's heart trembled. Her face paled, and her rippling eyes were filled with envy. Although she left, she already remained in his heart. Without waiting for Xiaohua to finish, Fairy Jing took a deep breath and waved her hand. Fellow Taoist Xiao, there's no need to say it. This is what it means to be a pair of lovebirds in the heavens and a branch on earth. Yin and Yang are connected through the heart, and the bridge of helplessness is stronger than metal. I understand. After saying this, Fairy Jing closed her eyes and seemed to be meditating. Xiaohua sighed in his heart, and also closed his eyes to comprehend the powerful divine sense technique. In the silence, the Pegasus had already flown far away. The scenery below the flying carriage changed and many cultivators passed by. Xiaohua had already changed his Taoist robes and looked like a scholar. Moreover, there was an early nascent soul stage female cultivator on the flying carriage, so no one dared to cause trouble. Seeing the sky turn dark and the Pegasus' brilliance illuminated half the sky, Fairy Jing opened her eyes and seemed to be in a good mood. She pursed her lips and smiled. "Fellow Taoist, this light feather heavenly beast is truly amazing. If it was in the hands of others, it would be a disaster." "That's right. When this Zhao's cultivation was still low, I didn't even dare to use it." Xiaohua took the opportunity to sigh and said, "After all, human nature is hard to fathom. Regardless of whether it's a Taoist cultivator or a Confucian cultivator, it's hard to avoid greed when they see this item. Oh, by the way, why did Taoist Yuan Qing want to kill you?" Fairy Jing didn't seem to want to ask this question at first, but after showing the shell to Xiaohua, their relationship seemed to have gotten closer. Then, after hearing Xiaohua's story, their relationship seemed to have gotten even closer. As they chatted, Fairy Jing inadvertently brought it up. Xiaohua smiled bitterly and said, "Actually, it's very simple. I'm on the profound yellow rankings." "Haha, I see." Fairy Jing was startled, and then she said with a smile, "I have to congratulate fellow Taoist Xiao. From now on, you can become famous in the hidden immortal continent. Any cultivator who wants to be famous will break their heads to find trouble with you." "Oh, is fellow Taoist on the profound roll or the yellow roll?" Xiaohua rolled his eyes at Fairy Jing and said with hidden bitterness, "Fairy Jing, do you think I've lived long enough? With my cultivation, how can I be on the profound roll? What's your rank on the yellow roll?" Fairy Jing didn't find it strange and asked with a smile. "Not high, not high. I just got on the profound roll." Xiaohua shook his head and said, "Just got on the profound roll." Fairy Jing shook her head even more. "Those Confucian cultivators are blind. With fellow Taoists' cultivation, I'm afraid you can get into the top 100. Yes, this was before I participated in the Jade Pavilion gathering." Xiaohua sneered and said, "I never thought I could be on the profound yellow roll. I'm afraid it's the doing of the Copper Pillar Country's king." Although Taoist Yuan Qing didn't say it, and he didn't have a specific name in his memory, I'm sure that the person behind this is definitely related to the Copper Pillar Country in countless ways. Speaking until here, Xiaohua was slightly startled, as if he thought of something. He didn't have many enemies on the hidden immortal continent. The Copper Pillar Country was one, and the other was the Duanmu family. Of course, the Duanmu family was a colossus, and Xiaohua only offended 1 or 2 disciples. However, Xiaohua couldn't rule out the possibility that Duanmu Qing and Duanmu Qiu weren't involved. Moreover, Xiaohua didn't know about the profound yellow roll before. He just found out from Taoist Yuan Qing's memory that it was a hidden Confucian power on the hidden immortal continent, the profound yellow roll. It was a bounty list set up by the Taoist disciples who had grudges with Confucian cultivators. The profound roll was ranked 180, and the yellow roll was ranked 360. The difference between the profound roll and the yellow roll was in strength. The yellow roll was generally below the 5th grade, while the profound roll was for old monsters above the 5th grade. As for the profound roll and yellow roll's ranking, it was based on the bounty and had nothing to do with one's cultivation. Of course, it was only average. Those with higher cultivation would naturally have higher bounties. Taoist Yuan Qing's memory didn't have the details of the profound yellow roll, and Xiaohua only knew that he just got on the yellow roll. However, Xiaohua couldn't ask Fairy Jing anything. After sneering, he said, "When I return to the Black Wind Ridge and destroy the Copper Pillar Nation, my ranking will probably rise." Hee hee. Fairy Jing pursed her lips and laughed. "If fellow Taoist Xiao destroys the Copper Pillar Nation, wouldn't the bounty be gone? Then how can fellow Taoists still be on the roll?" Hee hee, that's true. Xiaohua came to a realization. Looks like the Copper Pillar Nation is definitely going to be destroyed. Fairy Jing was a little puzzled and asked curiously, "Since fellow Taoist Xiao has such a deep grudge with the Copper Pillar Nation, why don't you just return to the Black Wind Ridge? With fellow Taoist's current cultivation, not to mention relying on Xiongni and the others, you should be able to restore the country by yourself, right? It's very simple." Xiaohua had previously concealed something from Fairy Jing, but now he thought for a moment and said, I'm not helping Jiang country alone. There's another person inside, and that's Xiao Jian. He is also the former king of the single Liang country that Xiao Jun and Jiji spoke of. As he spoke, Xiao Hua briefly recounted the whole story of the matter, and then he sighed and said, This Xiao has always felt that Xiao Jun was an ungrateful and shameless person. But all the way until now, this Xiao feels that. I seem to have been deceived by Xiao Jian. The heartless one should be Xiao Jian, and the loyal one should be Xiao Jun. For the truth of the matter, I have no choice but to go to the single Liang country and see for myself. Furthermore, the princess of Jiang country is a pitiful person, and she is also Yuanya. The only thing in my heart, I can't help but be cautious. I can't let Xiao Jian ruin the establishment of Jiang country. Still, there's such a strange thing? Xiao Hua's story was not short, and Fairy Jing listened with relish. At this moment, she was rather envious. I really didn't think that there would be such a romantic encounter in this world. Furthermore, fellow Taoist Xiao is indeed a man of his word. For the sake of the previous promise, for the sake of the Imperial Master's fortune, he actually participated in the Jade Pavilion meeting with such a profound cultivation. I truly admire him. Speaking up to here, Fairy Jing comforted Xiao Hua. Actually, fellow Taoist Xiao doesn't need to blame yourself. Although your cultivation far surpasses ours, you don't have the experience of establishing a country. It's normal for you to be deceived. Since fellow Taoist has the heart to investigate, you definitely know who Xiao Jian is. Of course, I feel that Xiao Jian was like this in the past, but after such a huge change, there might be some changes. Fellow Taoist doesn't need to be too worried. Sigh, that might not be the case. Thinking of Xiao Jian's gamble that night, Xiao Hua shook his head slightly. It's easy to change mountains and rivers, but hard to change one's nature. I only hope that I don't do anything wrong. What can a small first-grade cultivator do? Fairy Jing said coldly. He can't even be a pinky in front of Xiongni. Fellow Taoist Xiao can rest assured. And this is also one of the reasons why I accepted Xiongni as my disciple, Xiao Hua said with a smile. Sigh. At this moment, Fairy Jing suddenly felt a bit melancholy. I actually want to see Yuanya and Dia Wu. I want to know what happened to them in the end. What's so hard about wanting to see them? Xiao Hua didn't understand. When Fairy Jing follows me to the single Liang kingdom, we can return together. However, it won't be easy to see what happened in the end. Dia Wu seems to have some secrets and didn't admit to what happened when she was young. Who knows what happened in the end? It's actually very simple. Fairy Jing smiled faintly. Just like Yuanya, as long as he finds Dia Wu, he can stay by her side. But how would he know? His Dia Wu isn't called Dia Wu. His Dia Wu is a princess. His Dia Wu carries a heavy burden on her shoulders. We can't let him do as he wishes. Fairy Jing is right. However, isn't this too different from Fairy Jing going to the Black Wind Ridge? Xiao Hua said with a bitter smile. Oh, fellow Taoist Xiao, I will follow you to the single Liang kingdom. After that, I would like to ask fellow Taoist to accompany me to a place. I wonder if it's convenient for fellow Taoist? Fairy Jing didn't answer Xiao Hua's question. Instead, she changed the topic. Xiao Hua nodded without hesitation. Of course. Moreover, I have an agreement with the single Liang kingdom's Shui Ping to go to a secret place with him. If Fairy Jing is willing, we can go together. Perhaps there will be some opportunities. As for whether I will go or not, let's wait until we reach that place. A strange smile appeared on Fairy Jing's face, causing Xiao Hua to frown. All right. Xiao Hua couldn't force anything and nodded in agreement. Oh, fellow Taoist Xiao, do you know who's first on the profound ranking? Fairy Jing clearly didn't want Xiao Hua to think too much and asked with a smile. Xiao Hua smiled. Of course I know. Isn't it the Grand Mist Ancestor who just escaped recently? Then, fellow Taoist, do you know the interesting story of the Grand Mist Ancestor before he wreaked havoc in the Immortal Palace 20,000 years ago? Fairy Jing's lips curled up into a crescent moon as she asked Xiaohua with a smile. Xiaohua's eyes were like stars. He also smiled and said, "What happened 20,000 years ago has already turned into dust, not to mention that it was done intentionally by Confucian cultivators and Buddhist sections." This Xiao naturally didn't know. How did Fairy Jing know? -13. Chapter 3681. I naturally heard it from a senior who has a relationship with me, and it's true. If fellow Taoist wants to hear it, I can break it down for fellow Taoist. Good. Xiaohua clapped his hands and said, "This Xiao likes to listen to other people's stories the most. Fairy, quickly tell me." "Bah! How improper!" Fairy Jing's face was slightly red. After lightly spitting at Xiaohua, she lightly opened her red lips and spoke tirelessly. At this moment, the stars were shining, the crescent moon was like a hook, the distant mountains were faintly discernible, and the clothes were fluttering near the water. The sound of wind whistling entered his ears, the sound of pine trees rustling in his heart, and the fairy was softly telling stories of the past. In the night, Xiaohua was clearly somewhat intoxicated. In the past, Xiaohua didn't feel that the hidden immortal continent was very big, especially since each small country was only a few hundred to 1,000 li. It was much smaller than a city in the Dawn Rain continent. However, after coming to the Yaoai Mountain to participate in the Yaoai conference, he realized that he was still wrong. Although the countries of the hidden immortal continent were small, there were many countries, and the entire continent might not be small. And under Fairy Jing's guidance, this time, he flew to the single Liang country. Even with the speed of a Pegasus, it actually took him half a month to fly. This made Xiaohua understand that the hidden immortal continent was also a huge monster, far from what he had thought before. Fellow Taoist Xiao. Seeing the scenery in front of them change, the mountains began to gradually lower, the water began to surge, and small streams separated from the big river, turning the fertile land on the ground into pieces. Fairy Jing stood up and said, 300 li ahead should be the border of the single Liang country. Oh? Fairy Jing's divine sense can actually see 300 li ahead? Xiaohua stood up and said with a smile, "Seems like you also have a cultivation secret technique. You know all of my remaining secrets." Fairy Jing said with a smile, "It's not a secret technique, just a kind of talent." Xiaohua rubbed his nose and smiled bitterly. "This Xiao has racked his brains to find secret techniques and treasures, but I can't compare to you. You're already so powerful from the start." TSK. Fairy Jing curled her lips even more. "Don't talk about cultivation. You're someone who has a chance to be on the Xian ranking. How can an ordinary person like me compare to you?" Hee. Xiaohua smiled faintly and looked up. He saw that below him was a water village with little lakes all over. Paddy fields were either in the wilderness or on the hillside. Occasionally, there were terraced fields that Xiaohua was familiar with. It was as if ripples were spreading all over the foothills. In the mountains and on the terraced fields, there were villagers working. Under the shade of the trees by the river, there were laughing children. In the ravines and on the lakes, there were small boats either casting nets or drifting. It was a picture of a land of plenty. There were also melodious songs that sounded like the cries of orioles coming from the boat from time to time. While they spread across the land, there was also a sonorous voice that sounded like a lion's roar coming from the shore. It resonated with the woman's voice, adding a bit of vitality to the beautiful scenery. Not bad. Fairy Jing was in the air and couldn't help but praise. Let's not talk about the monarch of the Chanyang country. Just the simple customs of the people and their rich lives are enough to make this concubine have a whole new level of respect for Xiao Jun. Xiaohua smiled and said, "Moreover, this place is so far away from the Yaotai mountain. As the monarch of a country, Xiao Jun is actually so far away from the capital. He's not afraid of chaos in the country. It's commendable that the monarch can do this." "Do you still want to look deeper?" Fairy Jing asked with a smile. "There shouldn't be any need." Xiaohua nodded slightly. "But since we're here and the scenery is so beautiful, why not stop for half a day?" "Good." Fairy Jing was also happy. She pointed at the Pegasus and flying chariot and said with a smile, "Since that's the case, why don't fellow Taoists put away the Pegasus and flying chariot? We'll go in disguise." "As you wish." Xiaohua laughed loudly. This was a good show that he was good at. However, after Xiaohua put away the flying chariot, he suddenly raised his eyebrows and looked into the distance. His eyes revealed a kind of surprise. Fairy Jing sensed it and hurriedly looked over. She saw a small mountain in the distance. The mountain was covered with terrace fields. The terrace fields were filled with water, shining brightly and somewhat dazzlingly. It was noon and the sun was high in the sky. However, there were many people farming in the terraced fields. There was nothing strange about the hard-working situation. However, these people were all bald. Although they were wearing monk robes, the robes weren't very clean. Some were stained with mud and some were filthy. Many of the monks farming looked tired. Their monk robes were loose, and they were actually lying down under the shade of the trees to rest. How could they look like senior monks? Hee, it's a bit strange, Fairy Jing said with a smile. The Buddhist disciples this concubine knows all hold alms bowls in their hands and go around begging alms. Each of them has a noble and virtuous face, and looks like an otherworldly expert. Why are the monks here so vulgar and want to farm by themselves? I'll go down and take a look. Xiaohua had a smile on his face, looking very interested. When the two descended from the sky, their appearances hadn't changed, but their clothes had been changed. Xiaohua was wearing Confucian robes and holding a folding fan in his hand, looking like an elegant young master. Fairy Jing had changed into ordinary clothes. However, since she hadn't changed her appearance, her beauty was still far beyond that of ordinary people. The two walked along the road for a while, but all the people on the road, whether they were in a carriage or walking, couldn't help but look at Fairy Jing. Many people even drooled. Xiaohua bitterly smiled and transmitted, "Fairy Jing, why don't you change your appearance a bit? If you go and look like this, why would we need to descend from the sky?" Hee. Fairy Jing covered her mouth and laughed. She followed Xiaohua into the nearby forest. When she appeared in the distance, her appearance had become ordinary. "That's more like it." Xiaohua smiled and narrowed his eyes at the terraced fields in the distance. He quickly walked over and saw an old monk sitting on the ground resting. He walked forward and cupped his hands. "Amitba. Grand Master, please. I don't dare. When the old monk heard Xiaohua call him Grand Master, he hurriedly got up from the ground and put his palms together. "This old man is just an ordinary monk. I don't deserve to be called Grand Master. If young master doesn't mind, you can call this poor monk Chong Hong." "Oh, Master Chong Hong." When Xiaohua heard the old monk's name, he knew that although the old monk wasn't young, his seniority was really low. He didn't hold back and called him Master. "Benefactor is too polite. Calling me old monk is enough." At this moment, the old monk seemed to realize that he should call this young master benefactor. However, when he heard Xiaohua call him master, the old monk was very happy. His face was flushed red. Xiaohua smiled. "Master Chong Hong is too stubborn. Whether it's a master or a monk, isn't Chong Hong a monk? What other changes can there be?" Xiaohua's words were very Buddhist. If it was a senior monk, he would definitely secretly nod. Maybe he would have to salute again. Unfortunately, Chong Hong scratched his head and said with a smile, "Young benefactor, this old man has just shaved his head half a year ago. My Buddhist Dharma, to tell you the truth, this old man really doesn't understand. If you have any business, you can go to Qinghui Temple on the mountain. Oh, if young benefactor doesn't know the way, this old man can take benefactor there." "No need," Xiaohua said with a smile. "I was just passing by and saw that the people were simple and honest. Especially an old monk like Master Chong Hong, who was actually working in the fields. I was quite surprised, so I stopped to ask. This old man has been working in the fields all my life. If I don't work, what do I eat?" Chong Hong scratched his head and smiled. "This old man doesn't know what's so strange about this. Come. Xiaohua pulled Chonghong and said with a smile, "Let's sit down and talk. I'm afraid you're tired, so there's no need to stand." Saying this, Xiaohua looked at the stone next to him and sat down. Where was the bearing of a nascent soul master? "You're a good young master." Chonghong saw that Xiaohua's sitting posture was very familiar. He smiled and said to Fairy Jing behind Xiaohua, "Young miss is very lucky. This young master who doesn't put on airs must be a good person at home. He won't make young miss angry." Fairy Jing was much older than Chonghong. Hearing the old monk's words, her face flushed red. Her eyes couldn't help but fiercely glare at Xiaohua. She looked around and frowned. How could the ground next to the paddy field be clean? Fairy Jing couldn't sit down casually. Hee, young master is also a lucky person." After Chonghong praised Fairy Jing, he didn't forget to praise Xiaohua. "Young miss is from a big family. You have good upbringing. Although you haven't been to the countryside, you're willing to stay by the side for young master. In the future, young master's family will definitely be very harmonious." "Ha." Xiaohua laughed. He knew that the old monk was talking about the table. He cupped his hands and said, "Old master, sit down. Let's chat casually." "All right." The old monk Chonghong sat down and reached for something at his waist. Unfortunately, it was empty. He smacked his lips and said, "Sigh, everything is good about being a monk. There's food and drink, and there's work to do. It's a pity that there are more rules. This old man has smoked tobacco for God knows how many years, and now I have to quit." Xiaohua said with a smile, "Since you can't quit, then don't. Why make things difficult for yourself?" "That won't do." Old monk Chonghong hurriedly waved his hand. "Since this old man entered Buddhism, I have to abide by the commandments of Buddhism. This old man can't lose face for my Buddhism." Then the old monk looked at Xiaohua with vigilance. "Young master, are you testing this old man?" "Hee, monks should call themselves poor monks. Young master should also be called benefactor." Xiaohua replied with a smile. "That's different." The old monk proudly waved his hand and said, "That won't do. Just like a senior monk." -13. Chapter 3682. The old monk proudly said, "This old man's master said that the title is a mark. No matter what the title is, it's fine as long as others know it. Even if it's Buddha, this old man should praise Amitabha. It's normal for this old man to call him Buddha. At the very least, this old man doesn't open his mouth. It's not wrong for this old man to say it in his heart. But the precepts of Buddhism are that this old monk is fundamentally different from the old farmer. Only by abiding by these rules can this old man be a monk. Otherwise, this old man isn't a monk. Namo Maitreya Buddha." Xiaohua couldn't help but recite the name of Buddha. He nodded and said, "Old master is right. This young man is a bit stubborn." "Oh?" The old monk naturally couldn't hear the difference, but Fairy Jing was a bit stunned. She looked at Xiaohua strangely. She had never heard the name of Namo Maitreya Buddha before. "Young master, what do you want to ask?" The old monk regretfully raised his finger and sniffed deeply a few times. He lifted his hand and pulled out a few blades of grass from the ground. While speaking, he put the roots in front of his yellowed teeth and chewed. Strands of grass-green juice seeped out from the roots, emitting a wave of fragrance. Xiaohua looked at the old monk's somewhat familiar actions and said with a smile, "This young man has been to many places and seen many monks. Those monks are different from old master. They wear clean monk robes and kasayas. They hold wooden fish and prayer beads. The most important thing is that they hold bags. They don't farm. They beg alms every day and ask people to give them alms. So when I saw old master, this young man felt very strange. Could it be that the monks of Dan Liang are different from other places?" The old monk scratched his head and said with a bitter smile, "Young master, you've stumped this old man. In the past, this old man had never seen any monks. Later, Chenghui Temple appeared in Centipede Ridge, and then there were monks in Chenghui Temple. Since the day this old man saw monks, monks have to farm. This old man has never seen a monk who doesn't work. This old man can't answer you. Xiaohua thought for a moment and said with a smile, Master Chonghong, it's fine if you don't know. In a while, this young man will pay a visit to Qinghui Temple's abbot and ask. Then can Master tell this young man why you didn't live a good life and insist on becoming a monk? Why are we having such peaceful days? The old monk Chonghong blinked his eyes, looked at Xiaohua and said, Little Gongzi, which eyes of yours saw that this old man was living a good life before? What's wrong with me becoming a monk? Xiaohua didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It's still my fault. I've always felt that monks who leave home in the temple are all lonely lamps and shadows. It's very boring. Chanting sutras every day is tiring, and there are so many rules and precepts. How can it compare to being outside the temple? Haha, that's what the young master and young lady think. The old monk Chonghong said with a smile. Young master has a wife to warm his bed. Naturally, he doesn't need to become a monk. But I'm different. Fairy Jing couldn't help but blush and lower her head. She really didn't understand why Xiaohua was so interested in such a vulgar old farmer. Chonghong then explained the reason why he wanted to become a monk. The old monk's experience could be considered complicated. When he was young, he was considered a good laborer in the village. However, his family was poor and he couldn't find a wife. Later on, a woman from another country who fled to the Chaoliang country passed by and stayed in his home. However, later on, there was war at the border of the Chaoliang country. This area became the territory of another country. The people in the village were either killed or fled. The old monk's family was separated during the flight. When the old monk returned, everything had changed. In order to wait for his lost family, the old monk stayed in the village. His family didn't come, but time came. Although the old monk could farm and make a living, it wasn't easy to live alone. If he married again, he would be too old and wouldn't be easy to find. Helpless, the old monk found the Qinghui Temple in Centipede Ridge and donated his paddy field to the temple. He even shaved his head and became a monk. Every day, he ate and drank in the temple and farmed the temple's fields. His daily life was taken care of by the young monks of the temple. It was much better than before. Hearing Chonghong's words, Xiaohua frowned. It wasn't right to say that the Qinghui Temple took over the villagers' fields and turned it into their private property. After all, Chonghong volunteered. Moreover, Chonghong said very clearly that there were many other old monks who were in a similar situation. These old monks all volunteered to donate their fields to the temple. Chonghong and the other old monks were not able to grow all of these crops by themselves, but there were strong and healthy young monks in the temple. Usually, these old monks could not eat meat or fish, but they did not lack any other vegetables. They even had some silver and copper coins distributed to them. Not only that, there were monks in the Qinghui Temple urging Chonghong and the other old monks to chant sutras every day. Even if these old monks couldn't read, the monks would recite the sutras line by line and let these old monks chant along. The monks' usual homework was also necessary. Of course, the time for this homework might be much less than in ordinary temples. When Xiaohua heard the old monk Chonghong talk about Qinghui Temple, not only were there old monks like them, there were also some orphans who had been acolytes since they were young. Normally, the poor people around Centipede Ridge and those who had difficulties would come to Qinghui Temple to find a monk to solve their problems. Xiaohua couldn't help but turn to look at Fairy Jing and whisper, "The old are taken care of, the young are taught, the poor have support, the widows, lonely, and disabled are all taken care of." Although Fairy Jing wasn't a Confucian cultivator, she was in charge of a country and had heard of this. She nodded slightly. "You're right. The state teacher of this single Liang country isn't simple. Yes, after hearing Master Chonghong's words, I have an urge to meet this Buddhist state teacher," Xiaohua said with a smile. He then asked old monk Chonghong, "Old master, do you know Xiao Jian?" "Xiao Jian?" The old monk was stunned and shook his head slightly. "Which village is he from?" "Haha, Xiao Jian isn't a young man. He's the previous king of your single Liang country." Xiaohua smiled and explained, "Do you know this person?" So the person who gave birth to a son without a dick is called Xiao Jian? Chong Hong gnashed his teeth and shouted. Of course I know this person. If this person didn't lose a cockfight, how could my village be seized by the neighboring country? If the neighboring country's soldiers didn't come, how could my home be gone? So this damn son of a bitch is called Xiao Jian. He's really despicable. Damn it, I can't wait to eat his flesh and drink his blood. Namo Maitreya Buddha, Xiaohua hurriedly said. Master, you've broken too many rules today. Be careful not to anger Buddha. Humph, even if Buddha is angry, I'll still scold him. When the old monk Chong Hong heard this, he was furious. My Dan Liang country used to be so good. When I was young, the whole village and the surrounding villages were very good. But because of this bastard who gave birth to a son without a dick, the villagers around Centipede Ridge were ruined. Sigh, if it wasn't for the monks of Qinghui Temple, I don't know what would happen now. Oh. Hearing that, Xiaohua's heart moved and he suddenly asked. Then, Master, do you know who the king of Single Liang country is now? I don't care who it is. Chong Hong waved his hand angrily and said, They beat me and I beat you. It has nothing to do with me. I just want to live my life. Haha, then there haven't been any wars in the past 10 years, right? Xiaohua asked again. Of course not. Chong Hong smiled and said, With Buddha in my Single Liang country, how could there be wars? That makes sense. Xiaohua smiled and stood up, saying, Master Chong Hong, do you have time to bring me to visit the abbot of Qinghui Temple? Of course, of course. Chong Hong hurriedly stood up and raised his right hand habitually to knock on the stone below him. Unfortunately, he knocked on empty air this time. The old monk was a little embarrassed and said with a smile, Sigh, it's a habit of many years. It's not easy to change. But Master said it well, as long as you have Buddha in your heart, all habits can be changed. Probably. Of course, it's also because of Buddha's blessings. Xiaohua replied with a smile. Let's go, young master, please follow me to Centipede Ridge. The abbot of Qinghui Temple likes knowledgeable people the most. I remember that many scholars came to the temple in the past. Although the old monk, Chong Hong, was not young, he walked as if he was flying. He walked very quickly on the mountain path, talking as he walked. Although Centipede Ridge was called a mountain, it should be called a ridge. It wasn't high, but the ridge was quite big and extended for a long time. It was like a centipede with many hillsides. In addition to the common trees on Centipede Ridge, there were also many fruit trees. These fruit trees formed a forest. Where there were no fruit trees, sometimes there were melon gardens, sometimes there were wheat fields, and occasionally there were rows of bean sprouts. There were also some monks in these places. Some were old, some were young, and some were guarded by bald novice monks. These monks, like Chong Hong, all had smiles on their faces. Perhaps they couldn't say Amitabha, or perhaps they didn't have clean monk robes, but when they saw Xiaohua and Fairy Jing, they all put their palms together and smiled as they saluted, making Xiaohua happy. Chong Hong. Not far away, there was an enormous temple that covered the entire mountain ridge. Large and small monks' residences were covered in green cypress trees. A somewhat rough voice came from the mountain path. Why didn't you work in the fields and come back? Are you hungry? Xiaohua raised his head and looked over. He saw a thin and small middle-aged monk wearing a moon-white monk robe. The robe looked extremely shabby, but the shabbiness of the monk's robe paled in comparison to the monk's distressed expression. Master! Chong Hong saw this person and immediately stopped. He put his palms together and said respectfully, Disciple was just working in the fields and happened to meet these two benefactors looking for Qinghui Temple. Disciple was afraid that they would find the wrong place, so I brought them here. -13. Chapter 3683. And I know. You can go! When the middle-aged monk heard this, he said lightly. Then, he took out a fist-sized fruit from a bamboo basket and handed it to Chong Hong. This is what this penniless monk picked up from the ground. Take it to fill your stomach first. It's still early, so bear with it if you're hungry. Thank you, master. Chong Hong spoke respectfully. After receiving the fruit and bowing, he smiled at Xiao Hua and Fairy Jing before turning around and leaving. This poor monk Jian Dong greets the two benefactors. Jian Dong's tone began to sound like that of an ordinary monk. Xiao Hua and Fairy Jing cupped their hands casually as a greeting. Xiao Hua looked at the bamboo basket in Jian Dong's hand and smiled. What is master doing? Aren't you chanting in the temple? Why are you strolling around with a bamboo basket in your hand? Fairy Jing was a bit confused. Xiao Hua had clearly asked Chong Hong this question. She didn't know why he would ask again for no reason. Jian Dong put his palms together and said in a low voice, Amitabha. If this poor monk has Buddha in his heart, then no matter when or where, his heart will worship Buddha. If this poor monk doesn't have Buddha in his heart, then even if he sits in the temple with a scroll in his hand and a wooden fish in front of him, the golden Buddha sitting in the hall of great strength would still ignore this poor monk. And what you say makes sense. Xiao Hua didn't comment and said, Actually, you can send the strong men of the temple for the things in your hands. You don't have to come in person. Jian Dong's expression didn't change. He gestured for Xiao Hua to follow him while answering in a low voice. Other than the golden Buddha, everything else in Qinghui Temple is idle. This poor monk is a young monk, so I came. Seeing that Jian Dong's answer was very good, Xiao Hua's originally satisfied heart became even less picky. Soon after, Xiao Hua didn't ask any more questions. He only pointed at the surrounding fruit trees and melon fields and asked some questions. His tone was no different from that of a farmer in the countryside. At first, when Jian Dong saw Xiao Hua asking about the temple, he felt somewhat disgusted. But then he listened to Xiao Hua's words, which were related to the livelihood of farming and mulberry trees, and had the intention of asking for guidance. He thought Xiao Hua was a young official who happened to pass by today to collect materials, so he answered with great care, not hiding anything from him. Before arriving at the gate of Qinghui Temple, Xiao Hua had already asked about the temple's affairs. As expected, the Chanang state had given Qinghui Ridge to Qinghui Temple as a property. However, Qinghui Temple didn't encircle the ridge like the other temples. Instead, they divided the ridge into different areas and planted different things according to the soil and water. They even cultivated the land of Centipede Ridge together with the land under the ridge, regardless of whether the land belonged to Qinghui Temple or not. What was special about Centipede Ridge was that other than being used by the temple, it was also given to the surrounding villagers. Even the child beggars who had fled to this place were given to them. To put it bluntly, Qinghui Temple was like some kind-hearted rich people in the countryside. However, Qinghui Temple was different from these rich people. Qinghui Temple didn't accumulate money at all. Xiao Hua sighed slightly. The Buddhist doctrine of Buddhism was profound and taught all living things to be good. However, there was one thing that was hard for people to accept. The monks in the temple always considered themselves to be monks. They didn't produce anything themselves and only wanted people to worship them. They called it giving alms and soliciting alms. Of course, giving alms and soliciting alms were something monks should have. This showed that monks didn't have the foundation to establish themselves and could only rely on the help of people to live. However, most of the monks were eminent monks who gave alms. Most of them still had humanity. In the end, the temple had a lot of land and the monks lived a very rich life. They still had to rely on people who had difficulties to worship them. People had their own eyes, so who would believe in the temple? Who would worship monks? As time passed, the Buddhist sect began to appear hypocritical. I've learned something. Xiao Hua cupped his hands and said, If all the temples in the world were like Qinghui Temple, then why would there be a longevity town in the hidden Immortal continent? Monk Jian Dong didn't seem to know what longevity town Xiao Hua was talking about. He only smiled and said, Young benefactor, I'm afraid you came from another country and aren't a citizen of my country. In my country, all the temples are like this. Really? Xiao Hua raised his eyebrows and was somewhat surprised. Jian Dong didn't answer Xiao Hua's words. He looked at the stairs in front of him, and then looked at Fairy Jing behind him. He bowed and said, Amitabha. Female benefactor, my Qinghui Temple doesn't allow women to set foot in. Female benefactor, please serve tea outside. Fairy Jing's eyes flashed with slight anger. How could she put this secular temple in her eyes? However, Xiaohua's smile and warm words calmed her down. You wait here first. I'll come out immediately after I visit the temple's abbot. Xiaohua didn't say, fairy, or fellow Taoist, but it sounded warm, as if there was a kind of indescribable intimacy contained within. Fairy Jing agreed in a low voice. She turned her head and walked towards the mountain plum trees in front of the mountain gate. Benefactor, please. Jiandong raised his hand and gestured. He took the lead and walked up the stairs to the mountain gate. Xiaohua didn't release his divine sense, but he had already seen the exterior of Qinghui Temple on the way. This was a regular temple. It looked very big, but the buildings inside were simple. There was a main hall, a meditation room, and there seemed to be a forest of pagodas behind. Moreover, these buildings didn't look very new and were somewhat old. In particular, some places had a lot of moss because of the year-round rain collection. Although the mountain gate and stairs in front of Xiaohua were very clean and tidy, they were also somewhat shabby. They weren't even as bright as the mountain gate of Longevity Town's Shaojin Temple. Xiaohua followed Jiandong up the stairs and stepped through the mountain gate. What greeted him was a main hall and square. There was an incense burner in the square, and incense in the main hall. However, there were sparse villagers kowtowing and offering incense. There were several young novice monks accompanying them. The incense burner didn't seem very vigorous. Chongxi. Jiandong walked in and took a look. He called out to a young novice monk who was standing in front of the incense burner. Master! The young novice monk carefully placed the incense stick in his hand on the incense burner and hurriedly ran over. He put his palms together and bowed respectfully to Xiaohua. Greetings, benefactor. Take this benefactor to see the abbot. Master will go to the kitchen. Jiandong instructed the young novice monk. He then said to Xiaohua, This poor monk will deliver tea to the benefactor. Thank you for your trouble, master. Xiaohua nodded. Soon after, under the guidance of the little monk, Xiaohua walked through the main hall and went all the way inside. In the end, he actually passed through the meditation room and came to a pine forest. He saw a slightly withered old monk wearing a shabby kasaya sitting on a mountain rock. He was holding a shiny prayer bead in his hand and his mouth was slightly moving as he chanted. Martial ancestor! The young novice monk didn't dare to approach. He stood still from afar and bowed. A benefactor came to pay a visit. This disciple has brought him here. Who would have thought that the old monk didn't pay any attention to him? He only closed his eyes and slightly moved his hands. He was chanting scriptures word by word. Benefactor! The young novice monk turned his head and said apologetically, Martial ancestor is like this. If you want to wait, you can wait here for a moment. If you feel impatient, please turn back. This little monk still has some matters to attend to and can't accompany benefactor here. After he finished speaking, the young novice monk respectfully bowed and slowly walked away. Looking at his appearance, he was already used to this kind of situation. Moreover, his attitude was definitely not disrespectful. Xiaohua didn't mind that the group of monks had left him hanging. He faintly smiled and quietly stood there, listening to the old monk chanting scriptures. The old monk's voice was extremely soft, and even somewhat vague. However, Xiaohua heard it clearly. It was the Vimalaka Sutra. The Vimalaka Sutra wasn't a scripture that ordinary monks often chanted. The things inside were rather obscure. Even Buddha Sarira Bodhi had read it before, but he didn't understand it too well. When he heard the scriptures, Xiaohua felt somewhat disdainful at first. However, after a moment, a trace of seriousness appeared on his face. He then slightly closed his eyes and quietly listened. The old monk's chanting voice was like a gurgling stream flowing through the pines and into Xiaohua's ears. After a full 4 hours, the sky was already dark, but the old monk still didn't stop. Monk Jiandong also came twice. When he saw Xiaohua quietly standing there, he didn't dare to disturb him, and quietly left. Outside the temple, Fairy Jing took out a praying mat from her qiankun bag and sat down. She didn't cultivate, and only silently recited Xiaohua's teachings. As for monk Jiandong's tea, she didn't even touch it. The sky was already dark. Naturally, the monks who were working at the foot of the mountain returned. The group of monks was very well behaved. Their footsteps weren't loud and they didn't make any noise. When they saw Fairy Jing, who still had an outstanding appearance, they didn't dare to look at her too much and carefully entered the temple. Old monk Chonghong was naturally among them. He opened his mouth but didn't say anything and followed the others into the temple. Not long after, the sound of chanting came from inside the temple. Then, the bell rang and waves of the fragrance of vegetarian food came from inside the temple. In the twilight, Jiandong came back with a basket and some food to invite Fairy Jing to eat. Fairy Jing slightly opened her eyes and looked at him. She only said 3 words. No need. Then, she ignored Jiandong. Jiandong was helpless and could only put the basket next to Fairy Jing. Then, the young monk called Chong. She stood guard at the side. This Xiaohua is a bit strange. Fairy Jing was comprehending the mysteries of Xiaohua's teachings while also being puzzled. It's just a temple, what's so good about it? Could it be that there's a hidden Buddhist expert? When she thought of a Buddhist expert, Fairy Jing's eyes suddenly opened. Xiaohua had already said that he was proficient in Taoism, Confucianism, and Buddhism. Fairy Jing had seen Xiaohua's Taoist abilities and Confucian abilities, but she had never seen Xiaohua's Buddhist abilities. Could it be that Xiaohua really met a Buddhist expert in the temple? Fairy Jing originally wanted to release her divine sense, but she hesitated. She didn't know if her divine sense would disturb Xiaohua. Forget it, so be it. Fairy Jing closed her eyes again. Sometimes, waiting is also beautiful. How long can this beauty last? -13. Chapter 3684. The night had passed, and dawn was coming. Thick clouds covered the entire Centipede Ridge, and the land fell into darkness again. Kacha! Thunder rumbled in the distance, sounding very heavy in the night. Thunder? The young novice monk, who had been sleeping soundly beside Fairy Jing, was immediately awakened by the thunder. He looked around in fright, almost forgetting that he had fallen asleep outside the temple last night. Benefactress, quickly go down the mountain and take shelter from the rain. The young novice monk naturally couldn't see how many clouds there were in the sky, but he reminded Fairy Jing based on his intuition. Fairy Jing ignored him, still sitting there without saying a word. The young novice monk didn't dare to tarry and rushed into the temple. Before long, Jiandong hurried out with several monks, each holding a bamboo pole, an oilcloth, and other things. The monks seemed very familiar with what to do, and quickly set up a tent to protect Fairy Jing. Seeing the strong wind, the oilcloth was blown a bit askew, but the foundation was very solid, so there was no need to worry about it being blown away. Jiandong opened his mouth, wanting to say something, but seeing that Fairy Jing didn't say anything, he shut up. The young novice monk first stood in the tent for a while, seemingly wanting to accompany Fairy Jing. Unfortunately, it didn't take long for him to start trembling in fear. Fairy Jing gave a rare smile and said to him, "You can go back. I'm fine here." "No!" Chong Shi gritted his teeth. "Benefactress is a guest of Qinghui Temple. Although I can't let you take shelter in the temple, but..." While he was speaking, the rain had already started falling, smashing on the ground and the oilcloth. It was very fierce. The young novice monk shrunk his neck, not daring to say anything, and naturally leaned toward Fairy Jing. Although he was a young novice monk, Fairy Jing still wasn't used to it. She frowned slightly and blocked the young novice monk's approach. However, after a while, although it was raining heavily outside the tent, there wasn't a trace of coldness inside. Not only did the rain not fall in, but the wind also couldn't blow in. Outside the temple, there was such a heavy storm. Inside the temple, under the pine forest, it was the same. Moreover, the pine forest was like a wave amidst the strong wind. Strange sounds rang out one after another, as if there were many demons and ghosts dancing in the surroundings. Streams of rain poured down like a downpour. Clouds gushed out from Xiaohua's body, blocking everything outside his body. However, the old monk's body did not have any protection. He allowed the strong wind to blow his monk robes away, and allowed the raindrops to hit his body. Amidst the sound of wind and rain, the chanting of sutras continued. Xiao Hua had the intention to investigate. His gaze fell on the old monk's body. The wind and rain fell on his body, but the old monk didn't seem to feel it at all. It was as if this was the sunlight, as if this was the air. He didn't need to pay attention to it at all. All the old monk did was to rotate the prayer beads and recite the sutra. The heavy rain wreaked havoc for more than half a day, and it only cleared up at dusk. The entire sky was bright, and an enormous rainbow streaked across the sky, leaving behind a brilliant and extraordinary splendor. Benefactor! Is there something you need? The chanting old monk finally opened his mouth after reciting the last few words. His voice was a bit shaky, as if he hadn't spoken for a long time. In this world, other than the world venerated one, where else could there be? Xiao Hua indifferently replied. Oh? When the old monk heard this, he opened his eyes. His gaze was rather deep, and the wrinkles on his forehead also accumulated. Xiao Hua understood. If it wasn't for the heavy rain, perhaps there would still be dust and stains between the old monk's wrinkles. This poor monk, Shinku, greets fellow immortal. The old monk did not get up. He put his palms together and said, This one is Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua cupped his hands in return and said, This one greets Zen Master Shinku. Fellow immortal. You must be an expert Confucian cultivator. I wonder what advice you have for coming to my Qinghui temple? Shinku looked at the clouds around Xiao Hua's body and asked indifferently. Xiao Hua didn't hide anything and said, On my way here, this one saw your temple's monks farming at the foot of Centipede Mountain Ridge. I also saw the peace of the villagers near Centipede Mountain Ridge. It was different from what this one had seen before. Therefore, I was curious and came to pay you a visit. If that's the case, fellow immortal may leave. Shinku replied, treating his words like gold. Xiao Hua scratched his head and thought for a while, then said, This one wants to give some food to Qinghui Temple. Is that possible? If fellow immortal has the heart, you can go to the main hall. There's no need to look for this poor monk. Then, what if this one wants to discuss Buddhism with Zen Master? Xiao Hua asked with interest. Oh? Since when did Confucian cultivators talk about Buddhism? Shinku raised his eyebrows. However, he said with a bitter expression, However, fellow immortal is wrong. Buddhism is only in the heart. Even I, the Buddha, can only smile. If I were to preach it, would it still be a true scripture? Forget it, forget it. I won't discuss Buddhism with great monk. Which sect are you from? Xiao Hua smiled and waved his hand. In this poor monk's eyes, there is Namo Dipankara archaic Buddha in the past. In this poor monk's eyes, there is Namo Maitreya Buddha in the present. In this poor monk's eyes, there is Namo Shakyamuni Buddha in the future. How can there still be any sects in this world? Hearing this, Xiao Hua's nose almost went crooked from anger. This old monk's question was not answered. It was a common method of Buddhism. However, in the end, Xiao Hua still couldn't figure out this old monk's background. Old monk, you're no fun at all, Xiao Hua coldly said. Buddhism pays particular attention to opening the door of convenience. Although this one is a Confucian cultivator, this one also understands Buddhist principles and wants to discuss with Grand Master. You look like you're rejecting this one at the door, so how can you talk about merit? What cultivation are you talking about? Cultivation is cultivation. Merit is also merit. The two can't be mixed up. Shinku seemed to feel that he had gone too far. His tone softened. My Buddha talks about fate. If Benefactor is fated with my Buddha, this poor monk doesn't need to say anything more. Benefactor will naturally enter my Buddhism. If Benefactor isn't fated with my Buddha, what can this poor monk do even if this poor monk is eloquent? Then why is this monk sitting as the abbot of Qinghui Temple? Why are there so many benevolent fields around Centipede Ridge? Isn't this merit to attract the villagers to Buddhism? Isn't it to let the light of Buddha shine on the single Liang kingdom? The sea of bitterness is boundless. Repent, and you'll see the shore. This poor monk doesn't want any merit. The light of Buddha doesn't need eyes merit to shine on the single Liang kingdom. Shinku replied faintly. This poor monk only knows that cultivation is life. Every action and word is cultivation. Since this poor monk can't get rid of this stinky body, this poor monk can only cultivate day and night. Xiaohua wanted to say something, but Shinku continued. Benefactor, I'm afraid you have the same idea as ordinary people. As long as one cultivates, one must break away from worldly affairs. You don't know that everywhere in this world is a sea of bitterness. Even if you hide in a meditation room, it's impossible to be peaceful. Instead, why not go deep into the sea of bitterness to cultivate? Benefactor, you just mentioned merit. Saving one person is merit. Saving 10 people is also merit. It doesn't have to be saving others in times of danger to be merit. The monks of Qinghui Temple, and even the monks of other single Liang kingdom, although they lack the time to chant sutras and meditate, they are also cultivating while working. Moreover, the monks of my single Liang kingdom don't let the people of the world suffer and accumulate merit. Who can say that this isn't merit? Haha, old monk, you're right. Xiaohua laughed. Saving people from suffering is a small merit. Teaching people to get out of suffering is a great merit. There's no need to teach Buddhist principles. As long as you teach kindness, Buddha's light will shine. This Xiao is more and more interested in the state preceptor of the single Liang kingdom. Goodbye. After saying that, Xiaohua cupped his hands at Shinku. Auspicious clouds appeared under his feet, and he rushed into the sky. Outside the temple, Fairy Jing saw Xiaohua come out. She also turned into a rainbow and chased after him. In a moment, the two figures disappeared. Oh? Shinku raised his eyebrows, slightly surprised. Then he closed his eyes and was about to chant sutras. But at this moment, he thought of something and said loudly, Xingzhu, which disciple brought this benefactor here? This seed has something to ask. Xiaohua flew into the sky with a smile on his face. Fairy Jing saw him and said with a smile, Fellow Taoist Xiao seems to have gained a lot from this trip. Yes, indeed. Xiaohua nodded. The Buddhist sect of the single Liang kingdom is different from what this Xiao knows. Although Qinghui Temple is the smallest temple in the single Liang kingdom, everything it does is magnanimous. The abbot of the temple is also different from ordinary monks. He's indeed a cultivator. I've never seen fellow Taoists speak so highly of a monk. Fairy Jing agreed. It seems that Xiao Jun is indeed a wise ruler. Whether Xiao Jun is a wise ruler or not, I don't know for now. But the Buddhist disciple supporting Xiao Jun is an expert. This Xiao is very interested in this Buddhist disciple of an unknown sect. Oh? With fellow Taoist Tao's Buddhist sect cultivation, you can't tell what sect it is. Fairy Jing pretended to be surprised. Xiaohua waved his hand and said with a smile, This Xiao is just a dabbler. My Buddhist sect cultivation is for Taoist Yuan Qing to hear. How much can I know? But this Xiao also knows some secrets of the Buddhist sect. Unfortunately, this knowledge is not enough to see the origin of the Qinghui Temple's abbot. Isn't that simple? This place is only a few hundred miles away from the capital of the single Liang kingdom. We'll arrive in a moment. Fellow Taoist Xiao only needs to visit the state preceptor. Why wouldn't he tell you? Fairy Jing said with disdain. Xiaohua shook his head slightly. Don't be anxious. This Xiao still wants to see. I'll listen to fellow Taoist's instructions. Fairy Jing nodded her head in a virtuous manner. She didn't feel any annoyance beside Xiaohua. She seemed to want this road to be further and further, or even to have no end. After flying for a while, they arrived at another place. Some monks were farming, but there were no mountains here. Instead, there were many lakes. An exquisite temple was built between the lakes and mountains. Xiaohua didn't hesitate to descend from the cloud. What Xiaohua didn't know was that not long after he landed, a Buddhist light flew out from the Qinghui Temple of the Taowu mountain range. It quickly flew over his head in the direction of the capital of the single Liang kingdom. 2 days later, Xiaohua once again flew out of the small temple with a smile on his face. Fairy Jing simply used the auspicious cloud technique to follow behind him. When they encountered another temple, Xiaohua didn't stop but directly flew past it. It seemed that he was satisfied with what he saw in the 2 temples. -13. Chapter 3685. Fellow Taoist, are you not going to go down and take a look? Fairy Jing asked with a smile, clearly trying to find something to talk about. Xiaohua replied, Since I already know, I naturally don't need to go down. Fellow Taoist, aren't you afraid that Xiao Jun arranged this beforehand? Fairy Jing reminded Xiaohua. If the ruler of a country can arrange farming to such an extent, he must be a wise ruler. Xiaohua smiled. Fairy Jing, you might not understand farming and don't understand that farming is not easy to fake. Indeed. Fairy Jing also sighed. Although I am in charge of a country, most of the country's affairs are handled by the ruler. I only deal with the provocations of Confucian cultivators and my own cultivation. Right. Speaking of which, I finally understand why Xiao Jun wants to go to Yaohai Mountain. And then I already know. Fairy Jing pursed her lips and smiled. Although these Buddhist disciples cultivate, not many of them cultivate Buddhist protective divine abilities. This way, it will be difficult for the Chanyang country to resist the provocations of the nearby Confucian cultivator country. That's right. Nothing in the world is perfect. Advantages always come with disadvantages. Xiaohua sighed. The Chanyang country state teacher's actions have made the people rich, but the country isn't strong. Since the country isn't strong, it's hard to protect the happiness of the people. Xiao Jun probably saw this and went to Yaohai Mountain after traveling thousands of miles. No matter what, he's still better than that Xiao Jian who tricked you. Fairy Jing sneered. Then, she was suddenly stunned. She looked into the distance and asked curiously, What's wrong? So many monks. What are they doing? Xiaohua had already noticed and smiled. Who knows? Maybe there's a Dharma discussion somewhere and these monks are joining together? They seem to be coming for fellow Taoist Xiao. Fairy Jing blinked her eyes. Could it be that fellow Taoist Xiao defeated 2 abbots in 2 temples and they're coming for revenge? Xiaohua rubbed his chin and thoughtfully looked into the distance. His figure slowly slowed down. A few miles ahead of him, there were about a dozen monks sitting cross-legged in the air. Each monk was holding a wooden fish in their hands. As they knocked on the fish, they chanted sutras. They were blocking Xiaohua's path to the Danliang kingdom. These dozen or so monks were naturally nothing. What surprised Xiaohua was that below the dozen or so monks, in the mountain range, there were more than 100 monks sitting cross-legged. These monks didn't seem to have any Buddhist divine abilities and couldn't fly, but they also held wooden fish in their hands and chanted Buddhist scriptures like the monks in the air. I'm not familiar with Buddhist etiquette, so I don't know what this means. Could it be that it's welcoming us? Looking at the strange scene, Fairy Jing said curiously. Of course, it could also be that Xiao Jun sent a message back to the Chanyang kingdom, and the Buddhist sect's imperial preceptor sent someone to rely on. I'm not sure. Let's go and take a look first. Xiaohua's tone was somewhat cold. He said while flying forward. Actually, Xiaohua was also at a loss. If this was really Xiao Jun's message, then the previous farming matters might really have been arranged by the Buddhist sect's imperial preceptor. You lot are blocking this old man's path. What do you want? Xiaohua flew forward and scanned with his divine sense. He knew that these monks were only at the 1st or 2nd grade of origin energy. He didn't put them in his eyes at all and asked indifferently. Hearing Xiaohua's question, a monk flew out and bowed. Amitabha, those who walk different paths cannot work together. Confucian Senior, please turn back. My Chanyang kingdom doesn't have the person Senior is looking for. Do you know who this old man is looking for? This poor monk doesn't know. The monk's expression didn't change. Although my Chanyang kingdom was founded by a Buddhist sect, the imperial preceptor doesn't care about the matters of immortals and Buddhas. He only wants the citizens of the Chanyang kingdom to live a peaceful life. Therefore, I ask Senior to return to where you came from. Can you block this old man's path? Xiaohua sneered. Do you have the qualifications to give this old man orders? This poor monk doesn't dare. After the monk finished speaking, he returned to his original position and sat down cross-legged. He lowered his head and chanted Buddhist scriptures. Humph! Xiaohua snorted coldly. The clouds around him surged as he charged towards the monks. His powerful aura pushed the monks away before he could get close. Although the monks weren't thrown off their feet, they still opened up a path for Xiaohua to calmly fly through. These monks are very strange. Fairy Jing flew over and turned to look at the monks. They weren't discouraged and didn't have any anger on their faces. They adjusted their formation and slowly flew behind Xiaohua and Fairy Jing. They were still knocking on the wooden fish and chanting Buddhist scriptures. On the ground, although the monks couldn't catch up to the monks in the sky, they were still slowly moving forward. What are these monks doing? Xiaohua was a bit angry because when he scanned with his divine sense, there were monks blocking the sky every few dozen li. Obviously, they weren't willing to let Xiaohua enter the capital of the Chanyang kingdom. Moreover, these monks had low cultivation. They didn't even spare Fairy Jing a glance, let alone Xiaohua. This concubine doesn't know either. Fairy Jing smiled bitterly. It seems that the capital of the Chanyang kingdom has some unspeakable secret that they don't want fellow Taoist Xiao to see. Humph, if I had known earlier, I wouldn't have gone to Qinghui Temple. I would have killed my way to the capital, Xiaohua said regretfully. Fairy Jing comforted him instead. Fellow Taoist, don't think too much. If you went there directly, I'm afraid you would have seen everything. Now that fellow Taoist is pressuring them step by step, they're giving themselves away. If I think about it carefully. Xiaohua narrowed his eyes. Apart from Xiao Jun and Jiji, who else knows that the two of us came to the Chanyang kingdom? If they didn't send a message or even rush back to the Chanyang kingdom, how could these Buddhist monks stop me? Fellow Taoist, you've stayed in these two temples for a while. We can't rule out the possibility that they sent a message. Fairy Jing flew slowly with Xiaohua while thinking. Of course, it's also possible that they sent a message. Xiaohua nodded. But I didn't reveal any Taoist abilities. I'm only dressed like a Confucian cultivator. How could these monks know that I'm Xiao? Besides, they're only the smallest temple in the Chanyang kingdom. How could they know the secrets of the Chanyang kingdom? Yes, fellow Taoist's words are reasonable. Xiao Jun must have sent a message back. Fairy Jing thought for a while. There didn't seem to be too many possibilities, so she could only agree. Also, Xiaohua looked at the monk blocking his way and said thoughtfully, there's also the possibility that it's a misunderstanding. Let this Xiao go and ask. With that, Xiaohua urged his cloud to fly in front of the monk. Sure enough, when the monk saw Xiaohua flying over, he immediately flew out and said in a somewhat silly voice, we Buddhist disciples only want to accumulate merit in the Chanyang kingdom. We don't want to get involved in a battle between immortals and Buddhas. Senior, please turn back. There's nothing in front of us that Senior wants. Yes, let me ask you. What is it that I'm looking for? Who is it that I'm looking for? Xiaohua said indifferently. Who ordered you to come here? Has Xiao Jun already returned? This poor monk doesn't know what Senior is talking about. The monk wasn't angry. He put his palms together and said, the sea of bitterness is boundless. Turn back and the shore is before it's too late. You. Xiaohua was a bit angry and said sternly, fine, this old man will only ask you one thing. Has Xiao Jun already returned to the Chanyang kingdom? If the Xiao Jun you're talking about is the king of my Chanyang kingdom, then this poor monk can tell Senior where the king is if not in the dragon court. The monk said indifferently. However, although Senior is a Confucian expert, my Chanyang kingdom is a Buddhist country. There's Buddhist light shining in the kingdom. Senior, go. Not waiting for the monk to finish speaking, Xiaohua sneered, opened his mouth, and a mouthful of truchi rushed out, causing the monk to tumble down, and said, this old man wants to find someone. Actually, you juniors can stop me. Go. Call Xiao Jun out for this old man. Senior, please turn back. Please turn back. When a monk fell down, dozens of monks stood up. The monks behind the monk immediately knocked on the wooden fish and chanted something as though they were chanting scriptures. Each of them even used Buddhist divine arts. Xiaohua was quite noisy when he heard it. It was like a swarm of flies were flying around his ears. Humph. Xiaohua raised his hand and wanted to fling it out. However, after thinking about it, he didn't want to waste time with these little monks. He activated the clouds around him and rushed over again. Just like before, he flew away easily. Hee hee. It was rare for Fairy Jing to see Xiaohua so impatient. She pursed her lips and chased after him. Where is Xiao Jun? Not long after, another group of monks appeared. Their cultivation had clearly increased. Xiaohua didn't say anything and immediately shouted, "Hurry up and tell him to come see me." Ba. The unknown monk put his palms together and said, "Senior, please turn back. My family's grandmaster said that the person Senior is looking for is not in the Chanyang kingdom. Senior, please don't go any further." Humph. Without waiting for the monk to finish, Xiaohua flew over the monk's head. The monk could only lead the group of monks to chase after him. "Fellow Taoist Xiao, please calm down." Fairy Jing knew that Xiaohua was deceived by Xiao Jian and Xiao Jun again and again. She was really angry. She hurriedly whispered, "Perhaps there really is a misunderstanding." And indeed. I asked where Xiao Jun was, but they said the person I was looking for wasn't here. This person and Xiao Jun might not be the same person. Although Xiaohua was angry, he didn't lose his head. He nodded and said, "Actually, if they weren't both surnamed Xiao, I wouldn't have bothered with them." "Hee hee, and you say you're not angry?" Fairy Jing heard Xiaohua say I and chuckled. "All right, there are more monks blocking the way. I'll ask them carefully." Xiaohua's face was a bit red. The matter between Xiao Jun and Xiao Jian was after all the master of the Chanyang kingdom. Everyone knew that even an upright official couldn't resolve family matters. It was normal that Xiaohua couldn't tell. In front of Xiaohua was a short and shriveled old monk. He didn't look young. Xiaohua stood in the air and cupped his hands. "Venerable, please. Ba, Senior, please return." The old monk didn't beat around the bush with Xiaohua. He put his palms together and went straight to the point. -13. Chapter 3686. Xiaohua's body swayed in the air. Fortunately, Xiaohua's personality was good. If it was someone else, they would have already attacked. Xiaohua took a deep breath and asked, "I know you don't want me to go to the Chanyang kingdom because the person I'm looking for isn't there. But the problem is this person Xiao Jun? I'm only looking for Xiao Jun to ask him some questions. I don't want his life. What are you afraid of? Besides, I've already seen Xiao Jun on Yaohai Mountain. Even if I had any ill intentions, I wouldn't have attacked him there. Why must I chase him all the way to the Chanyang kingdom? Or, who do you think I'm looking for?" "Ba, I don't know." The old monk said he didn't know anything. "Senior, please turn back." Then, Xiaohua took another breath and asked, "Is Xiao Jun in the Chanyang kingdom?" "I don't know." The old monk answered again. "Senior, please turn back." Xiaohua opened his mouth and a green light shot out. It instantly approached the old monk's forehead. It was a flying sword light that touched the old monk's withered skin. Unfortunately, the old monk didn't even blink. He said in a low voice, "Ba, I know I'm not Senior's match. If Senior wants to kill me, then do as you wish. Buddha is merciful. I'll let Senior do as you wish." "You're crazy. Why would I kill someone for no reason?" Xiaohua was so angry that he had nowhere to vent. He snorted and ignored the old monk. His figure rushed into the air and flew away. Seeing Fairy Jing chase after him, Xiaohua smiled bitterly. This Buddhist disciple is good at everything, but he's stubborn. He knows he's not my match, but he still wants to stop me. "Oh, right?" he asked but didn't answer. "Even now, I don't know why they're doing this. Or maybe they don't know at all." Fairy Jing said with a smile. Things are getting more and more interesting. I feel that it's the Buddhist sect's imperial preceptor who has nothing to do with Xiao Jun, that's right. The problem is that the Buddhist sect's imperial preceptor stopped me because he didn't want me to find someone. This person. I really can't think of anyone. That's right, Xiaohua wasn't from the hidden immortal continent. He didn't know many people and didn't know many things. Although there were a lot of books about the hidden immortal continent in the space, Xiaohua didn't have the heart to look at those things that weren't useful for cultivation after he obtained the Confucian scroll from the Copper Pillar State Academy. Therefore, he didn't even know about the mysterious yellow list, which was something that Taoist cultivators should know about. Fairy Jing hesitantly said, Actually, this imperial teacher is trying to hide something. Humph, he's definitely trying to hide 300 taels of silver here. Xiaohua sneered. What kind of state teacher can this kind of person be? This time, even if this Xiao doesn't dare to be interested in their so-called secrets, then I can congratulate them now. They have successfully piqued my interest. Fairy Jing, are you interested in accompanying me to take a look? Fairy Jing's words had a double meaning. You're the one with the greatest responsibility in the world, and I'm the one accompanying you. All right, Xiaohua said with a smile. We won't waste time with these little monks. Let's go directly to the capital city. It was extremely simple for two cultivators of 4th or 5th grade essence force to break away from these monks. Fairy Jing didn't use any divine ability. The auspicious cloud under Xiaohua's body grew several times larger. He brought Fairy Jing past the group of monks and arrived at the capital city of the Danliang state in just an hour. Naturally, when they were still very far away from the capital city, several faint Buddhist senses swept out from the capital city. However, these Buddhist senses were very indifferent. After discovering Xiaohua and Fairy Jing, they didn't stop and immediately returned, as if they were just checking whether they had arrived or not. Xiaohua sensed the Buddhist senses and immediately determined the cultivation of the owner of the Buddhist senses. He coldly said, Humph, you're just a little monk of 4th grade essence force. You actually dare to block this old man's path. Fairy Jing was now very familiar with Xiaohua. She said self-deprecatingly, AI, that's right. I'm only at 4th grade essence force. This cultivation is really too difficult. Hee, Fairy Jing will definitely be able to divide your attention in the future. Oh, you'll definitely be able to astral projection. Right now, you're just accumulating, Xiaohua said with a smile. Astral projection, astral projection. I'm both looking forward to it and afraid. Fairy Jing's face revealed an indescribable expression. Let's just leave it to fate. Oh? Why? Xiaohua naturally knew the difficulty of advancing to 5th grade essence force. However, he still pretended to be curious and asked. However, before Fairy Jing could answer, two figures flew out from the direction of the Danliang state's capital city. They stepped on a thin layer of Buddhist light and flew in front of Xiaohua and Fairy Jing. And they're finally out, Xiaohua muttered. His figure stopped in midair. Fairy Jing also urged her auspicious cloud to fly a distance away. This poor monk Jingy greets fellow immortal Xiao. The monk in front was thin and tall. He wore a shabby monk's robe. His exposed hands and arms were extremely thin. He was simply skin and bones without a trace of flesh. Looking at his head, it was also like a skeleton. There were many wrinkles that looked like they were carved by a knife. Hearing this, Xiaohua narrowed his eyes and said coldly, Fellow immortal Xiao? It seems like Great Master Jingy already knows this Xiao's name. I presume you also know this Xiao's intentions? Humph. A monk at the side coldly snorted. He waved the shabby monk's staff in his hand. We have already let so many disciples block you. We don't want to shed all pretense of cordiality with you. Since someone wants to force us to our deaths, then don't blame this poor monk for being impolite. Shut your mouth. Although Jingy was angry, his tone was still indifferent. You are a Buddhist disciple. How can you be so competitive like ordinary people? It is also fate that fellow immortal Xiao came to my Danliang state. I'm afraid this is Buddha's test for us. After speaking, Jingyi turned to Xiao Hua and said, Fellow Immortal Xiao, the person you are looking for is really not in the Dan Liang state. Please return. Xiao Hua smiled and asked with interest, Let's not talk about who this Xiao is looking for. This Xiao wants to ask you. Monks don't lie. Are you speaking the truth? Jingyi indifferently replied, That's right. This poor monk is not lying. I will not deceive fellow Immortal. Since the person this Xiao is looking for is not in the Dan Liang state, you can just let this Xiao come to the capital city. Why block this Xiao on the way? Xiao Hua asked directly. My Dan Liang state does not want to get involved in disputes. Jingyi replied. If fellow Immortal Xiao comes to the Dan Liang state, there will be chaos in the future. Therefore, this poor monk does not want fellow Immortal to come. Then the person you are talking about, who is it? Xiao Hua stared at Jingyi and asked with a smile that was not a smile. Jingyi slightly shook his head. Fellow Immortal knows. Why do you need this poor monk to speak? I presume Great Master knows about soul-searching techniques? Xiao Hua raised his hand and threatened. This Xiao only needs to press this finger on Great Master's forehead. This Xiao knows what Great Master is thinking. Fellow Immortal can try. Jingyi was not afraid at all. His gaze did not shrink. Xiao Hua looked at Jingyi's dirty clothes and thoughtfully asked, Great Master Jingyi is from the Duda lineage, right? You clearly know, yet you still ask? Jingyi could not bear it any more and angrily said, Who doesn't know what you are planning? Xiao Hua ignored Jingyi and said again, In fact, before I saw Great Master, I didn't think of it. Even in Qinghui Temple, that little monk Shinku didn't say anything. However, since he didn't say which sect he belonged to, then he should belong to the Duda's branch. Do you think this Xiao is right? That's right. Fellow Immortal's eyes are like torches. This poor monk is indeed Ku Duda. The word Ku completely explained Duda's cultivation. Xiao Hua said, Although Buddhism does not advocate Ku Duda's arduous cultivation, even the revered one of the world praised his ascetic cultivation. However, this Xiao is somewhat puzzled. Duda has 13 items. How many items can Great Master hold? Since Great Master has the position of state teacher and the help of the Dan Liang state, how many more ascetic cultivations does Great Master have? Amitabha. The sea of bitterness is boundless. Where is not ascetic cultivation? Jingyi put her palms together and said softly, In the past, the revered one of the world fed the eagle with his body and abandoned his body. Today, this old monk will throw his body into the secular world. What is wrong with that? The revered one of the world sacrificed his body to save a pigeon. This old monk will sacrifice his body to save hundreds of thousands of people in the Dan Liang state. What is wrong with that? Ah? Xiao Hua was stunned. He somewhat understood the intention of Dan Liang state teacher Jingyi. Jingyi treated the position of state teacher as a kind of ascetic cultivation. She treated the responsibility of state teacher as a part of the sea of bitterness. She used it to sharpen her Buddhist nature in the secular world. Ku Duda's ascetic cultivation was indeed effective. Whether it was Buddhist Dharma or Buddhist techniques, they were far superior to ordinary Buddhas. However, just as Jingyi said, Ku Duda was usually alone. His methods of accumulating merit were limited. Even if he had great magic power, he could not accumulate much. However, if he became a state teacher, the amount of merit he could accumulate was incomparable. However, Xiao Hua immediately smiled bitterly. Taoist cultivators treated state teachers as glory, splendor, and wealth. They treated the power of a country as their reliance for cultivation. However, Ku Duda treated glory, splendor, and wealth as a sea of bitterness. He used his ascetic cultivation to contribute to the country. It had to be said that in the same country, Taoist cultivators and Buddhist cultivators were completely different. Xiao Hua turned his head to look at Fairy Jing. Fairy Jing had a contemplative look on her face. She seemed to have some thoughts. Forget it, forget it. Xiao Hua waved his hand. Whether it is Buddhist or Taoist, whether it is ascetic cultivation or chanting sutras, it is all cultivation. I do not understand Dutta's ascetic cultivation, nor do I understand the accumulation of merit. I originally wanted to take a look at the situation in the Danliang state. I wanted to see whether Xiao Jian or Xiao Jun was a wise ruler. However, Grand Master has repeatedly stopped me. Now I want Grand Master to give me an explanation. Xiao Jian? Xiao Jun? Jingyi was slightly stunned. Fellow Immortal, is related to the two of them by blood? No! Xiao Hua waved his hand. Grandmaster, there is no need to guess blindly. Do you think Xiao Jun or Xiao Jian is better? Both of them are dung. Jingyi answered without hesitation. You and I are also dumb. Only Buddha is real. When Xiao Hua heard this, he almost fell from the sky. He really wanted to choke Jingyi's neck and ask if he could speak properly. -13. Chapter 3687. All right, Great Master, tell me. Who do you not want me to see? This person is definitely not Xiao Jun. Xiao Hua went straight to the point. No. Who is it? This person is the person that fellow Immortal Xiao is looking for, but in reality, he is not the person in fellow Immortal Zhao's heart. Furthermore, this old monk does not lie. That person is really not in the single Liang kingdom. Jingyi spoke in riddles again. Woo! Hearing a huge gust of wind, Jingyi and Jinko suddenly felt as if the space around them had solidified. Not only were they unable to move, even breathing became difficult. Jinko turned pale with fright. The Buddhist staff in his hand trembled and Buddhist light shone brightly. Unfortunately, before his telekinesis could reach the Buddhist staff, he saw Xiao Hua suddenly stretch out his hand and grab Jingyi's neck. He said fiercely, Little monk, can you speak properly? Who exactly is this person? Jingyi did not resist and allowed Xiao Hua to grab his neck. He said with a hoarse voice, This old monk cannot say and does not want to say. If this old monk says, I'm afraid. Fellow Immortal Xiao will not be able to leave the single Liang kingdom. I'm also afraid that the single Liang kingdom will no longer exist. Who? Who is so powerful? Xiao Hua was shocked and asked. Sigh. A soft sigh like a spring breeze brushed past Xiao Hua's spiritual will hammer. A Buddhist will that was even more indifferent than Xiao Hua's Buddhist will swept over from the distant mountain. A voice that was louder than a golden bell rang in Xiao Hua's ears. If you are looking for this old monk, then come over. Martial ancestor. Jingyi escaped from Xiao Hua's hand and immediately knelt in midair. Tears flowed down his face. You! How can you show yourself? You know that this is a trap. Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva said, If I don't enter hell, who will? The voice sighed, but there was no resentment or hatred in the voice. Even though the voice was loud, Xiao Hua felt comfortable listening to it. Since Buddha wants this old monk to die, how can this old monk not die? I don't know how many years it will take to get rid of this skin. Now is the time. Martial ancestor. Jinko also knelt, but as his tears flowed, he looked at Xiao Hua with resentment. Damn it, he's at least in the embryo formation realm. Xiao Hua was truly shocked. He never would have thought that in the hidden immortal continent, in this Danliang country, there was actually a hidden 7th grade elemental energy. Buddhist expert. I think. Xiao Hua bitterly smiled. I'm afraid things are different from what Grandmaster thinks. There must be a mistake. This Xiao. Of course, Xiao Hua already knew that he had made a mistake. Furthermore, from the looks of it, this misunderstanding was extremely serious. It was actually related to the life and death of this 7th level origin power expert. Since he had already forced the other party out, how could a mere misunderstanding be resolved? Moreover, Xiao Hua immediately understood why clean clothes and those ordinary monks had blocked him. Not only did they not want him to find this Buddhist expert, they also did not want him to lose his life. Fellow Immortal Xiao, please! Jingyi stood up. Her expression returned to normal as she raised her hand. Fairy Jing smiled and said, Master Clean Clothes, we must have misunderstood. The master is meditating, so we won't disturb him. As she spoke, she gave Xiao Hua a meaningful glance, hinting for him to flee. Xiaohua bitterly smiled. This was a 7th grade elemental energy expert. He had never encountered something like this before. Although he had made a breakthrough in his lightning evasion technique, but Xiaohua wasn't confident that he could escape. And if he escaped, not only would he leave behind Fairy Jing, he would also provoke the other party. There would be no room for negotiation. After thinking for a moment, Xiaohua smiled and said, Fairy Jing, don't be anxious. This is a Buddhist 7th grade elemental energy expert, a Buddhist senior monk. He must have benevolence in his heart. I'll explain it to him clearly. 7th grade elemental energy? Fairy Jing was also stupefied, her face instantly becoming deathly pale. However, she immediately smiled and said, Fellow Taoist, don't be anxious. This concubine will accompany you. Fellow Taoist? Jingyi frowned. She sized up Xiaohua but did not say anything. Jingyi impatiently said, Fellow Taoist Xiao, what are you dawdling for? Don't you want to find Grandmaster? Grandmaster agreed to meet you. Why are you still not leaving? All right, this little monk will lead the way. Although Xiaohua's heart was pounding, he still believed in his intuition. The benevolence in this old monk's words would not lie. Humph! Jingyi still sneered. He urged his Buddhist light to fly towards the distant mountain peak. Seeing the mountain peak approaching, Xiaohua looked at Jingyi beside him and said softly, Monk Jingyi violated the precepts. This mountain peak is within the single Liang nation. How is it not within the single Liang nation's territory? This mountain peak has already been donated by the single Liang nation's king, Xiao Jun, to our Buddhist sect. It is a pure land and not within the single Liang nation's territory. He. Xiaohua chuckled and did not ask any more. Buddhist disciples were the most passionate. If he did not let Bodhi out, he would not be able to win against Jingyi. After flying to the side of the mountain peak, Jingyi did not dare to directly fly up. Instead, he landed on the ground and walked up the mountain path. The mountain path was rugged, narrow, and rather steep. Jingyi did not use Buddhist techniques and climbed up step by step. Xiaohua naturally did not mind. He also walked with his feet firmly on the ground. As for Fairy Jing, how could she walk? However, after walking a few steps, light clouds appeared under her feet. When they arrived at the waist of the mountain, they walked to a cave full of thorns. Jingyi knelt on the ground and kowtowed. Martial ancestor, disciples have brought 2 people here. Do you really want to see them? Come in. That voice was still faint, as if it was neither sad nor happy. Jingyi saw that they could not persuade their martial ancestor. They stood up and stood at the 2 sides of the cave. They put their palms together and said, 2 immortal friends, please! Looking at the pitch-black cave, Xiaohua did not dare to release his divine sense. He turned to look at Fairy Jing and said, Fairy Jing, wait outside. I can go in by myself. No need. Since we are here, I will also pay my respects to the Buddhist seniors. Fairy Jing's eyes were sincere as she looked at Xiaohua. She had the determination to advance and retreat together. All right. Xiaohua was helpless. He took the lead and walked into the cave. Fairy Jing did not hesitate to follow. The cave was very big and also very dark. There was no light, but it was nothing for Xiaohua and Fairy Jing. Xiaohua walked into the cave and saw that at the end of the cave was a huge wall. In front of the wall was a square stone. A tall and thin monk wearing a shabby monk robe was sitting there facing the wall. Looking at the back of the monk, Xiaohua respectfully put his palms together and bowed. Junior Xiaohua greets the Buddhist seniors. Junior Li Jing greets the senior. Fairy Jing did not dare to be negligent, and also bowed. Xiaohua, are you looking for this old monk? As the monk spoke, he slowly turned around. Xiaohua stared unblinkingly at the monk as he turned around. When he saw the monk's appearance, there was a boom sound. It was as if a thunderbolt had struck his head. Xiaohua's mind was filled with an explosion. He had never seen this monk before, but he clearly remembered this monk's appearance. Although this monk's face was very thin, his appearance had changed too much. Wasn't it the appearance of the shabby golden body in the Jiangchao temple of the Longevity Town? Wasn't it Xiaohua's disguised appearance of Xi Hang? This was the fake Xi Hang meeting the real Xi Hang. Moreover, in a flash, Xiaohua immediately understood everything. It must be what he had said in front of the Qinghui Temple of the Centipede Territory. If all the temples in the world were like Qinghui Temple, then why would there be a Longevity Town in the hidden Immortal continent? This attracted the attention of others, who thought that he came from the Longevity Town. Now that his Tao cultivation had not recovered, he only used the cultivation of a Confucian cultivator. They thought that he was a Confucian cultivator. The news was naturally sent from the Qinghui Temple to the state preceptor of the Danliang country, Jingyi. Jingyi only needed a little analysis to conclude that he knew about this monk and came to the Danliang country to look for this monk. Jingyi definitely knew that his Grand Master was not Xi Hang, not the owner of the 99 zhang golden body in the Longevity Town, so he wanted to stop him. However, he could not say it clearly. He could only say that although the Xi Hang Xiaohua was looking for looked exactly the same as his Grand Master, and even his Grand Master left merit in the Longevity Town and set up a statue, his Grand Master was not Xi Hang. Jingyi did not lie to Xiaohua. Moreover, as the state preceptor, Jingyi could clearly see that the Longevity Town, which was hundreds of thousands of li away, was now at the peak of the storm. As long as his Grand Master appeared, he would definitely be killed by the Confucian cultivators. He naturally did not want Xiaohua to see his Grand Master. It's a misunderstanding. After thinking it through, Xiaohua hurriedly bowed again. Junior came to the Danliang country to verify whether Xiao Jian or Xiao Jun was lying. I never thought of looking for Senior. Besides, this Junior has no idea who Senior is. He. The monk shook his head slightly. He raised his hand and pointed at the stone wall, asking, Xiaohua, do you see what this is? Xiaohua raised his head and looked at the shadow on the stone wall that seemed to be carved by a knife. He said in surprise, Senior, is this Senior's shadow? That's right. The monk nodded faintly. This old monk has been thinking about the relationship between my skin and the Saraira for the past 1,000 years. I have been meditating in front of this stone wall. This shadow is left behind by this old monk's skin. Great Master's Dharma is powerful. Junior is truly impressed. Xiaohua was so impressed that he prostrated himself on all fours. The monk continued, Since the shadow can leave behind traces, how can your eyes not reveal any flaws? Benefactor Xiao, you must recognize this old monk. Ai, all right. Xiaohua knew that this monk's Dharma was powerful. He might know something like mind reading, heavenly vision, and so on. He simply admitted, This Xiao has seen Senior's statue in the Longevity Town. There's nothing to hide. The Danliang country's monarch, Xiao Jun, knows. As he spoke, Xiaohua recounted the events of the past. He smiled bitterly and said, At that time, when Senior displayed his invincible might in Longevity Town, Junior had already fainted. By the time Junior woke up, Senior had already left without attaining the fruit. However, Junior heard from others and naturally knew who Senior was. -13. Chapter 3688. At this point, Xiaohua honestly admitted, Moreover, this Junior also knows that the Longevity Town isn't a good place. Master Jingyi doesn't dare to let people know that Senior Xi Hang is here. Therefore, this Junior didn't dare to admit it and wanted to cover it up. I was afraid that Senior would kill me to silence me. He. The monk laughed. So you're a Taoist cultivator. Jingyi should have thought of this long ago. This Junior also understands Confucian cultivation, so Master Jingyi misunderstood. Xiaohua hastily explained. Benefactor, don't be afraid. How could this old monk kill you to silence you? Actually, the monk sighed and said, If this old monk was Xi Hang, so what if this old monk went to the Longevity Town? Unfortunately, this old monk's Buddhist name is Benevolent, not Xi Hang. That Buddhist fruit isn't this old monk's, so how could this old monk go to the Longevity Town? Ah? How is this possible? Xiaohua was shocked to death. He looked at Fairy Jing, who was also shocked, and exclaimed at the same time. There was a Buddhist disciple who used this old monk's appearance to do good deeds in the Longevity Town. The benevolent Ku Tuchuo sighed and said, It was misunderstood by others. Oh, this junior understands, Xiaohua hastily said with a smile. Just like today's misunderstanding, what a coincidence. Today was a misunderstanding, but the Longevity Town might not be a misunderstanding, and it can't be so coincidental, the benevolent monk said. Hearing this, Xiaohua hastily bowed and said, Senior Ci Hang, as for whether it's a coincidence or a misunderstanding, this junior doesn't know. This junior definitely won't speak of what happened here. This junior is a Taoist disciple. This junior isn't interested in the disputes between immortals and Buddhas. Do we need to swear a blood oath? Fairy Jing probed. No need, the benevolent monk said kindly. This old monk has never forced anyone to swear a blood oath before. Okay, this junior guarantees that he won't say a single word, Xiaohua solemnly vowed. Of course, Xiaohua had to make a solemn vow. He definitely wouldn't say a single word about this matter, because he was the real Ci Hang, a fake Ci Hang. How could he reveal the real Ci Hang, a fake Ci Hang? Fairy Jing was overjoyed as she said, This junior is the same. This matter concerns Senior's life. This junior definitely wouldn't dare. Benevolent Xiang waved his hand and said, If that's the case, you may leave now. Thank you, Senior. Fairy Jing hadn't thought of such a simple ending. She bowed, looked at Xiaohua, and prepared to leave. But Xiaohua's starry eyes flashed with a strange expression. He looked at the knife-like marks on the stone wall and said in a low voice, Senior, you said that you've been in this cave for 1,000 years, and you've always been thinking about the relationship between the skin and the saraira. I wonder if you've learned anything? Can you tell me? Oh? Benefactor Xiao also knows about Buddhism? Ci Xiang was a little surprised and asked curiously. Xiaohua had a humble expression on his face. This junior has been curious since young. Regardless of whether it is the Taoist sect, the Confucian sect, or the Buddhist sect, I have some understanding of them. Since Senior has some insights, this junior is also secretly delighted. I hope to hear it. All right. A smile appeared on Ci Xiang's face as he said, Jingyi, Jinko, wait for the two of you to come in. Xiaohua and Ci Xiang's words weren't hidden from Jingyi and Jinko. The two of them heard clearly from outside, and their faces were already red. When they heard the call, they thought it was Ci Xiang's scolding. They hurriedly came in and knelt on the ground. This disciple was careless and caused such trouble. Grandmaster, please punish me. Unexpectedly, Ci Xiang didn't answer and instead said, My Buddha has said that the corporeal body is a skin on the outside, easily decaying. Inside, the saraira is a spirit, immortal for 10,000 years. When Jingyi and Jinko heard this, how could they not know that Ci Xiang was lecturing? They hurriedly sat down cross-legged and closed their eyes to listen carefully. Xiaohua hurriedly sat down after seeing this. Similar to Jingyi, he put his palms together and quietly listened to this rare comprehension. This old monk thinks that a person is a person. Everything is based on the corporeal body. The corporeal body's influence is truly important, sometimes even more powerful than the saraira. The corporeal body is the shadow, leaving scars on stone walls. However, the saraira has no light, leaving no traces in the mortal world. The saraira can't leave the corporeal body, and it can't be nourished without the corporeal body. Ci Xiang's words drifted in the cave. Those who were fated to hear it were intoxicated, while those who weren't fated to hear it were irritated. Fairy Jing sat for a moment and saw the joy on Xiaohua's face. It was even more pronounced than Jingyi and Jinko's frown. She was delighted. She knew that she didn't understand this, so she quietly flew up from the ground and landed outside the cave. She also sat down cross-legged and comprehended Xiaohua's teachings in her heart. She stood guard for the 4 people at the side. Time flew by, and 81 days had passed since Xi Xiang's words. On this day, just as Fairy Jing comprehended the beauty of it, an indescribable smile appeared on her face. The magic power around her quietly surged, and layers of multicolored light began to ripple under her snow-like skin. Suddenly she heard a thunderclap in the pitch-black cave. It was so deafening that even the deaf could hear it. However, Fairy Jing still didn't frown, because this sound was very strange. It seemed to be extremely loud, yet also extremely soft. It seemed to be in her ears, yet it also seemed to be in her heart. Fairy Jing only felt her body expand, and all of her magic power instantly dissipated. Then, before Fairy Jing could think again, she saw Buddha's light flourish in the cave. This Buddha's light was different from what Fairy Jing usually saw. Not only did it rush out of the cave, but it even rushed into the mountain. The mountain didn't seem to have anything in it, but it also came out of the mountain. In the blink of an eye, the Buddha's light spread from the middle of the mountain to the top of the mountain. It was as if the entire mountain was filled with Buddha's light. Then, bursts of Sanskrit chants came from the cave and even the entire mountain, floating in the air and in people's hearts. In the Buddha's chants and in the Buddha's light, there were tiny images of fairies that were as small as flies, and images of dragons that were even weaker than mosquitoes. Not only did they dance around the cave and the mountain, but they also surged with the Buddha's light toward the capital of the Chanyang kingdom, enveloping the surroundings. Gurgle! The Buddha's light pierced through the void, and streams of sparkling and translucent silver light fell on the mountain peak. When the Buddha's light on the mountain peak came into contact with the silver light that was invisible to the naked eye, it immediately swelled and gradually formed a humanoid golden body. Fairy Jing immediately understood that this was the strange phenomenon caused by the benevolent Venerable Master. She wanted to get up, but in the Buddha's light, her muscles and bones were limp, and she couldn't move at all. Even her mind was drifting. Roar! The strange phenomenon lasted for an hour, and then there was a lion's roar in the cave. The Buddha's light on the mountain, as well as the Buddha's light that rippled for miles, suddenly shrank and disappeared into the cave. In front of Fairy Jing's eyes was still the ordinary cave and the inky darkness. Ba! As a Taoist Yuanying, Fairy Jing couldn't help but chant Buddha's name. She stood up from the ground, and the benevolent voice sounded in the cave again. Buddha has a saying that a flower is a world, and a leaf is a spring and autumn. We Buddhists are burdened by our physical bodies, and we can't be free for our entire lives. I've cultivated hard for thousands of years, but I still haven't achieved Buddhahood. I don't have any obsessions in my heart, and I'm even comforted. Senior brother Xiheng from afar almost achieved Buddhahood. Although it's senior brother Xiheng's merit, it's also my merit. I have no hope of achieving Buddhahood in this life, so I'll wait for the next life. There's always hope, and there's always an end to life. Everything in the world is arranged by the Buddha. Although I don't know why the Buddha sent Xiao Tianhui to me, I know that I can't remember any merit in my heart, and all cultivation is based on external things. Therefore, I can't not see Tianhui. Jingyi Jinko, do you understand? There was silence in the cave, and no sound could be heard. Fairy Jing shook her head slightly, knowing that Jingyi and Jinko didn't understand Great Master Xi Xiang's Zen theory. Xiao Tianhui. Great Master Xi Xiang's tone was hesitant, and he probed. Have you understood? There's a lamp in the world that illuminates the earth. People see the light, but don't see the lampstand. What's wrong with the lampstand? Xiao Hua's voice sounded. There's a lampstand, but there's no light. Who can see the lampstand? There's no need to have a lampstand, there's no need to have light, but there's light that illuminates the world. Ba. Excellent, excellent. Great Master Xi Xiang chanted Buddha's name and didn't speak again. After a while, Jingyi and Jinko accompanied Xiao Hua out of the cave. Fairy Jing's gaze wavered, and the Xiao Hua in her eyes seemed to have changed greatly, but also didn't seem to have changed at all. Let's go! Xiao Hua quietly transmitted his voice. Great Master Xi Xiang is in seclusion again. All right. Fairy Jing transmitted her voice and moved her body, slowly flying down the mountain path. Xiao Hua and the other two respectfully bowed towards the cave and carefully walked down. After leaving the mountain peak, Xiao Hua bowed and said, "Great masters, please forgive me for offending you." Jingyi's face was rather dry. Great Master Xi Xiang's rare lecture, but he and Jinko didn't get as much as Xiao Hua. They were really disciples of Buddhism in vain. Hearing Xiao Hua's words, he hurriedly put his palms together and said, "Amitabha, there's no need to mention this matter. It's this old monk's fault. Please, Xiao Tanwei, if you want to see if Xiao Jian or Xiao Jun is lying, just go to the capital city and you'll know." "All right." Xiao Hua didn't want to go, but looking at Fairy Jing, he felt that there was only one last step left. After hesitating for a while, he agreed. However, the four of them flew into the capital city of the single Liang Kingdom and flew out in less than an hour. At this moment, Jinko was no longer there, and Jingyi was beside him. Xiao Hua had a smile on his face as he bowed and said, "Great Master Jingyi, please return. The doubts in my heart have been resolved." "Thank you, Great Master. And, as long as Xiao Tanwei doesn't have any doubts," Jingyi smiled and said, "this old monk is an ascetic monk, following the ascetic path of my Buddhism. It's rare for Xiao Jun to be able to participate in the daily practice, which surprised this old monk." "That's right. To be able to live in a dilapidated palace, to be able to protect Queen Gigi, and to live in a daily life that's even worse than the ordinary marquises of other kingdoms, this kind of monarch is the fortune of the single Liang Kingdom." Xiao Hua nodded and then took out a huge qianquan bag from his sleeve and handed it to Jingyi. He said with a smile, "This Xiao has disturbed your kingdom and also listened to Great Master Xi Xiang's lecture. This is this Zhao's sincerity, please accept it." -13. Chapter 3689. "Oh?" Jingyi glanced at it and didn't take it. He waved his hand and said, "My Shanliang country's bodhisattva doesn't accept charity from any benefactor. Please take it back." Xiao Hua explained, "This is a gift from me to the king of Shanliang country, Xiao Jun. It's also a gift to the people of Shanliang country. It's not charity." Jingyi wanted to say more, but Xiao Hua smiled and said, "Master, take a look first." "Okay." Jingyi could only take it. He opened it and was moved. He put his palms together and said, "Amitabha. Since that's the case, this old monk thinks." Just as she said that, Reverend Clean Clothes shuddered, and grief appeared on her face. She turned her head around and looked at the mountain in the distance. She said mournfully, "Amitabha, Grand Master, has passed away." "Ah?" Xiao Hua was also shocked. In his heart, he instantly understood why Great Master Xi Xiang still wanted to see him even though he had some misgivings. Why Great Master Xi Xiang still had to spend 81 days of hard work to give them an explanation. "This old monk won't send you off." Jingyi bowed and said, "I hope the two of you can remember your words, Master, don't worry. This Xiao understands." Xiao Hua hurriedly replied. Fairy Jing also nodded in agreement. Jingyi didn't say anything else. He put away the qianquan bag and hurriedly flew to the mountain peak. Xiao Hua stood in the air and bowed deeply to the mountain peak where Master Xi Xiang was. Then, he flew away without saying a word. Fairy Jing knew that Xiao Hua was in a bad mood, so she didn't say anything. She silently followed behind. The two flew for half a day. Xiao Hua suddenly stopped and looked around. He asked curiously, "Where are we flying to? How would this concubine know? This concubine is following behind you." Fairy Jing smiled and said softly, "Although Master Xi Xiang left, this concubine heard him say that if he couldn't achieve karma in this life, he would be able to in the next life. Moreover, Buddhism's cultivation is different from my Taoism. They emphasize reincarnation the most. Today's death is tomorrow's life. Today's karma is tomorrow's cause. Fellow Taoist, you don't have to be too sad." Xiao Hua nodded. He understood. He knew that he had thought of many things. "Oh right, what did you give Jingyi Master?" At first, he didn't want it no matter what, but in the end, He refused to let it go. Fairy Jing tried to find something to talk about. Xiaohua smiled. He took out another qianquan pouch from his sleeve and tossed it to Fairy Jing. Then I'll give you one too. Oh? Fairy Jing was truly surprised. When she opened it, she unconsciously beamed with joy. So it's so much rice. Then I will kindly accept it. On behalf of the people of my country, I thank Taoist Master Xiao. That's right. If it were ordinary spiritual herbs, Fairy Jing might not lack them, and there were plenty of them in this world. But with so much rice, who could take out so much in such a short time? With so much rice at the critical moment, who knew how many lives could be saved? No wonder even the clean-clothes master was moved. Let's go! Xiaohua waved his hand, and the Pegasus and flying chariot rushed out of the space. He said, Let's return to Black Wind Ridge. This Xiao wants to see how Xiao Jian will face this Xiao. Fellow Taoist, have you forgotten? Fairy Jing didn't get on the chariot. She sweetly smiled and said, You promised me that after arriving at the Dan Liang country, you would follow me to a place. Yes, this Xiao remembers. But when this Xiao was discussing with Xue Ping about going to the secret area, didn't you also say so? Xiaohua was somewhat confused. I thought you were going to that place with me. Fairy Jing rolled her eyes at Xiaohua. Xue Ping asked for my opinion. No matter what, he is still a junior. How can this Xiaohua not answer? Just because this Xiaohua gave advice doesn't mean this Xiaohua has to go. Hee. This Xiaohua thought that the things inside moved Fairy Jing's heart. Xiaohua giggled. Unexpectedly, Fairy Jing didn't laugh. Instead, she solemnly reminded him, Fellow Taoist Xiao, my Tao sect has many ruins on the hidden Immortal continent. Those that are easy to find or not too dangerous have all been found by fellow Taoists. The ruins that have been found today are all left behind from the ancient times. The restrictions inside are very powerful, and the methods are also unimaginable. Although fellow Taoist Zhao's strength is outstanding, if you face the restrictions left behind by the ancient Almighty, you may not be able to gain any advantage. Moreover, according to what this Xiaohua knows, fellow Taoist Zhao's accumulation is very deep. Now is the time to comprehend and go into seclusion. This kind of dangerous matter is mostly done by people who are unable to break through bottlenecks. Fellow Taoist Xiao is not suitable. Then what about Fairy Jing? Xiaohua giggled as he looked at Fairy Jing. Don't be so mischievous. Fairy Jing was somewhat embarrassed and angry. I'm telling the truth. My cultivation is different from others. Although I do need some ancient items, ordinary things, I can solve them myself. Seeing that Fairy Jing was angry, Xiaohua hurriedly smiled and said, Fairy Jing, please calm down. It's not that this Xiaohua doesn't want to listen to Fairy Jing, but since this Xiaohua has already made a promise, he still has to keep his promise. Moreover, this Xiaohua also faintly feels that this trip to the secret area may have some gains. This Xiaohua still has some confidence in himself. Fairy Jing helplessly waved her hand and said, As you wish. As for whether I will go or not, wait until you go with me to that place. That place, where is it? Why is it so mysterious? Xiaohua was somewhat puzzled and asked in a low voice. Hee, it's a secret for the time being. We'll talk about it when we get there. Fairy Jing giggled and jumped on the flying car. I'll show you the way. All right. Xiaohua's heart was rarely peaceful. He nodded and urged the flying car to fly in a certain direction. After flying for more than a month, the weather also changed a lot. From autumn to cold wind, and then to hot. Seeing that yellow sand and barren mountains began to appear in the surroundings, Fairy Jing's always calm face had some slight fluctuations. During this month, Fairy Jing didn't close her eyes to cultivate. Instead, she chatted with Xiaohua. She would tell him some stories about the sea, or some interesting things about her travels in the hidden Immortal continent, or some of her experiences in the Thousand Demons' sacred realm. Occasionally, Fairy Jing would ask him questions about her cultivation. Regarding cultivation, Xiaohua naturally didn't hide anything from her. As for chatting, he generally just smiled and didn't say anything. He originally didn't come from the hidden Immortal continent. If he spoke too much, he would naturally be exposed. As for cultivation, as soon as Buddha's relic Bodhi came out of the cave where Benevolent Master was meditating, he immediately went into seclusion. It seemed that Benevolent Master's comprehension of life and death, the corporeal body, and the relic were extremely important to Bodhi. In fact, even Xiaohua understood that Bodhi was one of his primordial spirits. Bodhi's corporeal body was actually his relic, and his corporeal body was the corporeal body of the Buddha's relic. Benevolent Master's so-called spirit was Bodhi, and the relationship between the corporeal body and the relic was ultimately the relationship between Xiaohua and Bodhi. If Bodhi could comprehend this point, it would most likely be extremely beneficial to him and Bodhi. As for the place in Xiaohua's dantian that was injured by Kong Hanwu, it had already recovered under green-robed Xiaohua's wholehearted efforts. In particular, the 140 or so nascent souls were placed around the invisible nascent soul by green-robed Xiaohua according to the formation of the capital star formation. The 5 Chi righteous thunder had already returned to normal. Every time it landed on the invisible nascent soul, a trace of lightning would rush into the bodies of the 100 or so nascent souls. Although these nascent souls grimaced in pain, their bodies would gradually expand, and they also seemed to be nourished. Soul cultivator Xiaohua naturally wasn't idle. Every 6 hours, he would come out of the mysterious dark cloud and release all kinds of vibrating green seal characters from his mouth. At an extremely rhythmic pace, the characters would land between the eyebrows of these nascent souls. The green seal characters would become green threads that lingered between the nascent soul's eyebrows and gradually merge with them. While the souls of these nascent souls were being repaired and their corporeal bodies were being tempered, they gradually fell into Xiaohua's control. Green-robed Xiaohua, on the other hand, felt as if he had just survived a calamity. After his dantian's injuries were healed, he happily lay down within the 5 Chi righteous thunder to receive the lightning strikes. While enjoying himself, he narrowed his eyes and pondered on how to refine a spirit tool. Therefore, Xiaohua's harvest during this month was also great, whether it was in experience or cultivation. Xiaohua keenly felt the change in Fairy Jing's mood and asked in a low voice, "Are we almost there?" Fairy Jing took a rare sniff, as if she had caught a cold. She faintly glanced at Xiaohua, then pointed at the desert in the distance and whispered, "It's in the valley over there." "Oh?" Xiaohua was surprised. He looked at the barren land to his left, and then narrowed his eyes to look at the scorching sun above. He didn't quite understand why Fairy Jing insisted on bringing him here. After thinking for a moment, Xiaohua released his divine sense. However, after only a moment, a strange expression appeared on his face. Xiaohua! You! What's wrong?" Fairy Jing naturally noticed Xiaohua's expression and asked in bewilderment. There doesn't seem to be anything funny, right? This Xiao isn't laughing," Xiaohua said with a smile. This caused Fairy Jing to frown and faintly say, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, I know it's wrong to hide it from you, but since we're already here, can fellow Taoist also tell me a story?" Of course. Seeing that Fairy Jing, who hadn't called herself concubine for a long time, suddenly called herself concubine, without saying "I," Xiaohua hurriedly stopped smiling and said very sincerely, "This Xiao didn't see the place Fairy Jing talked about, but this Xiao saw something interesting. Fairy Jing will know about it after a while." This Xiao isn't laughing at Fairy Jing. That's good. Fairy Jing knew she was overthinking and blushed. She nodded and said, "Then, let's fly there." "Okay." Xiaohua pointed in a direction similar to where Fairy Jing was going. "A long time ago, there was a girl who liked to cultivate." Fairy Jing sat on the flying carriage and said in an indifferent tone, as if she was really telling a story. However, Xiaohua understood that this should be Fairy Jing's own experience, just like how he told Shui Shui. 13. You're tuning into the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.